Generally, you said feminism is neutral.
Here's what actually happened.
The foundation of all knowledge.
Money. I'm really mad that
what difference does it make, right? What
Stop.
the deregulation of the industry is obviously going to cause more of that industry.
And to lubricate the trust connection between people until they have enough.
Yet we could still look at biological reality in determining who's a female, even if there are.
Why don't you denounce feminism the same way you're denouncing capitalism? If you don't...
For something to be objective, it needs to be verifiable. And you can't verify...
If I make a claim as a political pundit, it is true that I definitely could be wrong. That you're promoting, right?
Ideology is the main thing in politics, right? This is my ideology. So 2015, anyone go back and watch the footage? The first GOP debate.
Cool. Robert. Oh, that? Very hard, you said.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. I am Sarah, the Raging Tomato, here bringing to you live another fun debate on this wonderful Mother's Day evening. It is the gift to me today that these two gentlemen are here on my show to debate adrenochromes. The statement for the evening is Freemason-funded Adrenochrome Mkultra research relates to blood magic, mind control, and psychedelics. Say that 3 times fast. I dare you. With me this evening is Paranoid American and, of course, Craig McNeill from FTFE, a regular who has made his return back to the stage, and Paranoid, who debuted just a couple weeks ago on eugenics. I'm really excited to bring this one to you. All right, Paranoid, you have the affirmative claim, sir. I'm going to hand the floor to you for your opening statement, please.
All right, well, let me acknowledge that the prompt is provocative, but it's well documented. And the reason that I'm even doing this is to steelman an already incredibly strong argument that I've been building for quite a while. So I hope everyone's up for the task. So more acknowledgements. I know that the word adrenochrome has been turned into an internet meme. I know that it gets associated with QAnon, Satanic Panic, Pizzagate, all sorts of internet folklore. I'm not here to defend every single rumor that's ever come up with the word adrenochrome. I'm going to basically defend a very narrow set of objective claims that I can back up indefinitely. A, adrenochrome was Freemason-funded, and not in a vague sense, but as a direct result of the 33rd degree Scottish Rite Supreme Council, and that without this particular funding from Freemasons, we wouldn't have any of the modern day claims of magic and psychedelics and blood magic associated with it. B, that adrenochrome is actually a hallucinogen / psychedelic / psychogenic. We can kind of like fill all that in. I'm going to use psychedelic as maybe a placeholder, but that we have modern claims that go back to the 1940s all the way up to modern, to the 1990s, that all affirm this between scientific papers and even declassified CIA documents. And then C, maybe the one that gets a little expansive, that this blood magic association isn't necessarily arbitrary or random, but it's being used right now to ridicule and basically suppress any legitimate research into adrenochrome as a topic, which further sort of separates it from the very objective ties to Freemasonry and to MKUltra mind control. So my main goal of this debate is kind of to show how the concept of adrenochrome, just mentioning it out loud, can automatically infer all sorts of criticism and ridicule before you even get to finish the statement. So I'm actually glad that I'm going to be able to point out the exact claims here. So first, I also want to kind of say what the claims are not, just so we can define boundaries. This is not a claim that there's a specific CIA memo that says Freemasons-funded MK Ultra blood magic adrenochrome rituals. That would be silly to consider that would even be documented, but that we have clear overlapping historical evidence that starts with Scottish Rite Freemasons funding schizophrenia research. That directly leads to Dr. Abram Hoffer and Dr. Humphrey Osmond coming up with something called the Adrenochrome hypothesis. This is presented to the Freemasons only in 1952. They fund it. The research gets about 2 years of actual clinical trials. And then in 1954, the actual adrenochrome hypothesis is published for everyone else to consume. I also want to note that this is more of a probable cause style argument. It's not going to be beyond reasonable doubt because the concept of MK Ultra, some of these papers were just declassified within the last decade, with many more to hopefully come out. So there's a level of suggestion. So let me go and say that there's also going to be like 3 different approaches that I'm going to try and use to make a really good case here. The first level, I guess degrees, let's say call 3 degrees to be on brand. The first degree is documentation. We've got documentation that proves Scottish Rite funding schizophrenia research existed. We've got documentation from the original adrenochrome researchers citing that Scottish Rite funding as being the only access that they had to go on these clinical trials. And then the last bit of documentation are declassified documents from the CIA that cite both MK Ultra, Artichoke, even Bluebird alongside adrenochrome. The second degree of this is kind of subjective. It's that there's programs that overlap in time. There's personnel networks where the same scientists are going between certain forms of adrenochrome research, and now they're working with other MK Ultra sub-projects, which don't directly tie adrenochrome to those sub-projects, but it starts to establish a pattern. That the psychiatry and a lot of the initiatives in psychiatry also had a direct overlap with MK Ultra CIA programs in the 1950s. And then schizophrenia serves as this umbrella over all of these components. That's the suggestive aspect. And then finally, I guess the more expansive one is going to be symbolic. So I want to claim that by blood magic that we talk about here, again, I'm not going to claim that the CIA has some sort of documented supernatural magic sub-projects. Although I would recommend you look into Subproject 121 if that's your angle. But that there's this ritualistic, symbolic logic of fear tied to vitality, tied to human sacrifice and transformation, and all sorts of supernatural claims that get tied in with blood. And the adrenochrome sort of becomes the secular stand-in for what was previously supernatural religious claims. And that it's not, again, not arbitrary. Someone didn't just throw a dart and decide they were going to put adrenochrome and use it as that symbol. And then that also, along with this blood magic and conspiracy theory angle, that approach is being actively used to discredit any sort of research into adrenochrome, which I think is further exacerbated by the fact that it can't necessarily be patented, so it's not pharmaceutical industry friendly. So again, like I said, that third point it's much more sprawling. So I figure we can clearly talk about the objective first 2, and then with all the extra time in the world, we can go on to the million angles that the blood magic inquires. So I also want to mention the 3 main claims here with quick backups. Freemason-funded. Without Scottish Rite support, there would not be any adrenochrome research, specifically in the context of psychedelics. Aside from it not being easily patentable, so it wasn't friendly to the pharmaceutical industry, it also was incredibly unstable to maintain in its aqueous state. So almost all other scientific experimentation that usually gets claimed to debunk it is alongside a different substance, chemically different, called carbazochrome, or I believe it's monosemi-carbazone, and that's a shelf-stable version, which has been claimed by Dr. Abram Hoffer in a majority of his papers as not being a psychedelic variation of adrenochrome, which was also cited in Legal Highs by Adam Gottfried, which was released in the 1970s. The very first page, because it lists all the different legal highs in alphabetical order, specifically states that adrenochrome in its stable shelf form is not psychoactive. So again, to close this, I'm not asking the audience to convict on one specific isolated term. And I want to point out that if the government's going after someone for conspiracy of a crime, they don't necessarily have to catch you red-handed. They don't have to catch you on video. If you're found with the tools, the resources, the intent, and the historical pattern, that's usually enough to be caught up on a conspiracy charge, or of like a cat burglar. If they pull you over and they find all the tools to do a robbery, but they didn't catch you in the act of the robbery, it still sets a legal precedent that you don't have to necessarily go beyond reasonable doubt, that you can basically just line up all the different elements. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do here, and that Adrenochrome was funded by Freemasons. It was part of MK Ultra, and there is an active effort right now, starting with the ADL and expanding to mass media, to sort of shut down the conversation.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Paranoid. I'd appreciate that. And of course, Craig, to you for your opening statement, please.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on again, Sarah. I do appreciate it. Hello to everyone watching on both my channel and Sarah's channel. Make sure you've smashed that like button like it's Daniel Pratt's face. Okay, so let's start by making something very clear. I am not here to defend the CIA. I'm not here to pretend MK Ultra was fine. I'm not here to deny unethical human experimentation happened. MK Ultra was real. CIA drug experimentation was real. Psychedelic research was real. Abuse of vulnerable people was real. Government secrecy and cover-ups were real. So before anyone drops the normal conspiracy tactic of saying, oh, you just deny everything, I don't. I accept real history. What I reject is conspiracy soup. Tonight's claim is not simply MK Ultra existed. It's not simply Freemasons funded some medical research. It's not simply adrenochrome appeared in psychiatric literature. The claim is that Freemason funded adrenochrome research connects to MK Ultra, mind control, psychedelics, and secular blood magic. That's not a claim. That's a corkboard having some kind of nervous breakdown. My position is simple. The evidence supports Scottish Rite funding of schizophrenia research. It supports Hoffer and Osmond presenting their adrenochrome hypothesis to a Scottish Rite committee. It may even support the CIA being aware of adrenochrome as one of the many substances discussed in mid-century psychopharmacology. But it does not prove Freemason-funded MK Ultra. It does not prove MK Ultra continued a Scottish Rite adrenochrome program, and it does not prove adrenochrome was operationally used for mind control, and it does not prove blood magic. It definitely does not prove some Masonic CIA occult drug pipeline where men in aprons secretly invented vampire LSD in a lodge basement. That leap is not evidence. That's conspiracy parkour, the kind where the bloke immediately face plants into a bin. Okay, I'm going to start with a couple of concessions, though. Yes, the Scottish Rite, specifically the Supreme Council 33rd Degree Scottish Rite Northern Jurisdiction, funded research into dementia precox, which is what we would now broadly associate with schizophrenia. That is real. Yes, Nolan D.C. Lewis was involved in that field. That's real. Yes, Hoffer and Osmond developed an adrenochrome hypothesis related to schizophrenia. That is real. Yes, they presented those ideas to a Scottish Rite dementia precox committee. That is real. And yes, the CIA was interested in drugs, hallucinogens, interrogation, behavior modification, and how to protect agents from being dosed. Also very real. But here's where the wheels come off the shopping trolley and it just rolls directly into a canal. Because my opponent does not just need to show these things existed in roughly the same historical period, he needs to prove a connection. Not this happened near this, not these people worked in the same broad field, not a CIA video mentioned a drug, not Freemasons funded mental health research, therefore adrenochrome, therefore MK Ultra, therefore mind control, therefore blood magic. No, because that's not how evidence works. You need a chain. Scottish Rite money went to this specific adrenochrome research, and that research was picked up by their specific CIA or MK Ultra project. And then that project continued the same research line, and that research was used for mind control. And somehow this represents secular blood magic. That's the chain. And any link breaks, the whole thing collapses. Right now, what we have is not a chain. It's a pile of disconnected paper clips floating in conspiracy soup, and someone's labeled it research with a crayon. So let's start with the funding claim. My opponent says Freemasons funded the initial adrenochrome research because they funded dementia precox research more generally. And that is already a problem. Funding a broad field is not the same as funding every later subclaim inside that field. If a charity funds cancer research and one researcher later studies a weird compound, you don't automatically get to say the charity funded every conclusion that researcher ever reached. If a university hosts a talk, that does not mean the university funded the work. And if a flat earther walks into a physics department, it does not mean the university has endorsed water finds its level as a replacement for orbital mechanics. It means security's had a bad day. And the distinction matters. He needs to grant records. He needs grant records. He needs dates, amounts, recipients, receipts, specific papers, specific funding, acknowledgements. He needs to show that adrenochrome work itself was paid for by Scottish Rite funding, not merely that Scottish Rite funded broad schizophrenia research in the same historical period, because those are not the same claim. Freemasons funded schizophrenia research is one claim. Freemasons funded adrenochrome research is another claim. Freemasons funded the majority of early adrenochrome research is an even stronger claim, but MK Ultra continued their research is another claim entirely, and therefore blood magic is where the argument puts on a wizard hat and just runs into traffic. This is the trick with conspiracy soup, guys. Everything gets blended until no individual ingredient can be tasted anymore. Dementia precox research becomes adrenochrome research, and adrenochrome research becomes MK Ultra. MK Ultra becomes mind control becomes blood magic, blind magic becomes Freemasons. And suddenly we're expected to act like it's coherent history instead of a man trying to complete a jigsaw puzzle with pieces from 7 different boxes and a bit of toast. So let's move to the MK Ultra connection. My opponent's strongest claim appears to be that a declassified CIA video mentions adrenochrome alongside mescaline and refers to it as a hallucinogen in the context of counteracting or understanding drug effects. Fine, let's grant that for the sake of argument. What does that prove? It proves the CIA was aware of adrenochrome. That's it. It does not prove adrenochrome was used in MK Ultra human experiments. It does not prove it was administered to unwitting subjects, and it does not prove that MK Ultra continued Hoffer and Osmond's research. It does not prove Freemason funding, and it does not prove blood magic. It does not prove successful mind control. It proves that a compound being discussed in psychiatric literature was known to the CIA during a period when the CIA was interested in drugs. And that's not shocking. It's what you would expect. If they mentioned adrenochrome, that does not magically turn every previous adrenochrome paper into a Masonic pipeline feeding MK Ultra. It's not a connection, that's a bibliography. A mention is not a program. A reference is not a continuation. A continuation is not a funding trail. A funding trail is not blood magic. The phrase referenced in MK Ultra research is doing a ridiculous amount of heavy lifting. It's carrying more weight than me trying to get through a leg day after a kebab and 4 hours of sleep. Referenced could mean mentioned in passing, included on a list, briefly considered, tested, administered to humans, or operationally used. And those are not the same thing. So tonight I would like precision. Was adrenochrome really mentioned? Was it tested? Was it administered to humans? Was it part of a named MK Ultra sub-project? Was it operationally used? Was it connected to a Scottish Rite funding by a document, memo, grant, or contract? Because if the answer is we don't know, but it's implied, then we've left the land of evidence and entered the foggy swamp of conspiracy fan fiction. And then there's the blood magic part. My opponent says he does not believe in supernatural magic. Fine, good, very mature. We're all proud. Someone get him a sticker. But then he says adrenochrome is a secular stand-in for blood magic. Okay, then please define it. Does it mean blood extraction, ritual practice, human sacrifice, symbolic folklore, a rhetorical analogy? Because if blood magic means all of those at once, then it means nothing. It's just spooky emotional seasoning sprinkled onto an already overcooked conspiracy stew. If the claim is literal blood extraction, then prove it. If the claim is ritual practice, prove it. If the claim is symbolic analogy, say that clearly and stop smuggling in the stronger implication. If the claim is merely some people later associated adrenochrome with a satanic panic or QAnon mythology, then congratulations, you've proven the idiots on the internet are in fact idiots. And I already knew that because I've made a career out of watching flat earthers lose fights with shadows. The most revealing answer, though, was to the question I asked before the debate. What evidence would falsify your claim? And his answer was, I don't believe anything can falsify my claims. And that's the entire debate in one sentence, because if nothing can falsify your claim, then evidence is not what you've got. That is not historical research. That is not science. It's not skepticism. It's belief with footnotes glued to it. A real claim carries risk. A real claim can be wrong. A real claim tells us what evidence would count against it. But if the position is nothing can falsify this, then what we're dealing with is conspiracy theology. And I'm not here to debate theology wearing a lab coat from Spirit Halloween. I'm here to ask for evidence. So my opening challenge is simple. Show the chain. Not a pile of names, not a reading list, not Freemasons funded schizophrenia research and the CIA mentioned adrenochrome. Show the direct chain. Scottish Rite funding to specific adrenochrome research, to specific CIA MK Ultra continuation, to specific human use or operational purpose, to specific factual meaning of blood magic. Because if you can't show that chain, then the honest version is much simpler. Scottish Rite Freemasons funded some schizophrenia research. Hoffer and Osmond developed and presented an adrenochrome hypothesis. And the CIA later looked at many supposedly psychoactive substances. Conspiracy theorists mash those facts together into a spooky bedtime story for people who think I'm just asking questions counts as research. This is not evidence of Masonic MK Ultra adrenochrome blood magic pipeline. That is 3 mundane historical facts standing on each other's shoulders in a trench coat. I'm happy to discuss real history, and I'm happy to concede the real documents. I'm happy to acknowledge the ugly realities of MK Ultra, but I will not let vague associations masquerade as proof. The issue is not whether MK Ultra was real, it was. The issue is whether my opponent can prove the claimed connection between Scottish Rite funding and MK Ultra adrenochrome mind control blood magic nonsense. So right now, the connection is thinner than the flat earther's understanding of angular momentum.
Thank you, Craig. And to the audience, we are going to get through our debate. Then we will move into closing statements. We will read and respond to your kind super chats. And then, of course, we will open up the panel for our Q&A portion. So if you do have something to say to this topic, just hang tight and we'll drop the link into the chat later when we're ready. Also, I do believe both Paranoid and FTFE are streaming to their channel. So if you could head on over, give them a like, subscribe, share, and do all of those things, especially sending money. They love it. All right, gentlemen, I leave the floor to you.
Okay, I think I should be able to ask a question because I'm the one that's kind of on the back foot here with the whole thing. So I'm going to start with just a very simple question, if you don't mind, Paranoid. Is Paranoid, is that how I should refer to you? What should I call you? Bob, would that work?
Paranoid works.
Okay, Paranoid. Can you just give the direct evidence chain from Scottish Rite funding to specific adrenochrome research, then to a specific MK Ultra project, then to a specific mind control or blood magic claim? Because I need the chain.
Okay, so I've got a basic timeline of where all of this starts, and I'm going to try and keep it abbreviated. If you want me to go deeper into some aspect, we can go deeper into it. This all starts 1934. Melvin M. Johnson is the sovereign grand commander of the Scottish Rite 33rd degree Supreme Council Northern Jurisdiction. It's a mouthful. He's basically the grand poobah of the Northern Jurisdiction 33rd Scottish Rite. He ends up proposing, they do an entire investigative research of where could we put our money that it's not being put right now. And that ends up being this huge blanket term called dementia praecox, which would include schizophrenia, Alzheimer's, all sorts of different mental issues. They kind of fell into this huge umbrella. The very next year, they form a committee. They prove that we're going to do this dementia praecox initiative. And Nolan D.C. Lewis, as you always mentioned, he becomes the field director. He's like the main coordinator, the conduit between who gets scouted for programs that need funding and who gets it from the Scottish Rite. So this is, if you want the documentation of this particular D.C. Nolan and Melvin M. Johnson being at the hest of this between 1934 and 1935, it's in the Library of Congress under the Dr. Nolan Lewis papers, MS 008011. I'm not going to point out everyone, but I do have a document number for every document that I cite. So if you can concede that you trust me on that much, otherwise I'll add the document numbers to all of these. 1935, there is an archive letter to Dr. Nolan Lewis, and this is basically somebody asking for this dementia praecox research funding. This directly leads to some of the initial adrenochrome research because there was a hypothesis it was being detected in schizophrenic blood. And this goes papers 1937, 1939, 43, 47, 49, all the way to 1951. And this is where the rest of the scientists that probably make the strongest compelling argument here for. So 1951, there was a researcher called Dr. Humphrey Osmond, who's going to come up in the blood magic aspect of this too. Humphrey Osmond comes to Saskatchewan and starts working with Dr. Abram Hoffer. When Osmond comes there, he's already got in his mind that there's something in the blood that could potentially be causing schizophrenia, that could be isolated and maybe have mescaline-like effects. They don't know exactly what it is. They don't know where it comes from. They just know that it's in the blood somewhere. So in 1951, as they team up with another researcher named John Smithies, they're asking their colleagues, and the description that they're giving, something that's in the blood, something that has some sort of hallucinogenic properties, and specifically it's a derivative of adrenaline. There was a scientist that basically told them something, and his name was Hutchian. And this is also documented, Journal of Medicine, 2007, 4/20/2005, and it's called the adrenochrome alternative. But this is where they specifically cite when these connections were made, where they heard that there was some sort of a spray that had adrenaline that once it turned pink, soldiers were reporting extreme hallucinations, auditory and visual hallucinations. So at this point was the first time that this concept of pink adrenaline and adrenochrome became targeted on their sites. So here's so far a chain of events. And I want to point out that once they find this, they immediately, Dr. Abram Hoffer and Osmond, they give a presentation to the Scottish Rite Council on dementia praecox before they publish anything. They give it to them first. The Scottish Rite funds them for 2 years of clinical trials in which they test it on humans, pigeons, rats, dogs, cats, a whole list of animals, and they conclusively come that this has a indistinguishable or undeniable effects on the mental process of all these different animals. You raised your hand.
Yeah. First off, it's kind of, that's background, not really a chain to MK Ultra, but you specifically said there that they tested it on humans. Correct. I, in my research, found zero evidence of clinical testing on humans. Could you present the documents that would back that up, please? Yeah, absolutely. So this one comes from the Adrenochrome. Comes from Humphrey Osmond and John Smithy's Schizophrenia New Approach. And here's specifically what they said. Subjects were tested between October 4th, December 19th, 1955, using a fresh solution synthesized by Pfizer. And this was the series of 12 subjects. It also mentions that the second series of 12 subjects was tested January 9th to April 13th, 1956. And were those subjects human or
these were human subjects, and it comes out later outside this paper that this was Dr. Abram Hoffer, some of his colleagues, their wives, and their neighbors. They basically brought some home from the lab and had the locals sort of test it. And what they did was they basically kept a tally of who received a placebo and who received one of these substances of the adrenochrome. The placebo column, it had one person identify change in perception, one person in thought, mood, personality, 7 people anxiety. They all got anxiety that had the placebo. The people that took the adrenochrome, 12 of them reported changes in their perceptions of thought, 3 in their mood, and 8 it has a carryover for that next day. So it was a overwhelming, out of the small sample set of 24 people total, that in humans they all had a remarkable effect. So this was well documented that humans did try this.
But you just said it was outside of the research. The actual research, from what I've seen, wasn't humans. You've just said it was outside of the research. It was outside of it, but the actual research papers that you've cited were on rats and mice and pigeons, not on humans. None of the papers you just cited were actually said anything about humans.
This was included in the exact same paper that cited pigeons, plants, mice, rabbits, cats, dogs, monkeys, and it goes on to cite humans. I mean, I've got.
But I read those papers and they didn't say anything about humans. You just said it was outside of those papers.
I mean, if you want me to provide you the document as we're talking here, the fact that you didn't find it doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't exist. So I don't know how to counter that you didn't find the document that proves that there was human trial. Now, I want to clarify that this was not MK Ultra human trials. This was Dr. Abram Hoffer's.
Yeah, this was just Scottish Rite stuff. Yeah. I'm on board with that so far. Yeah.
So let me continue the sequence of events, because here's where in 1952, this is where they actually put together this paper between Humphrey Osmond and John Smithy's called Schizophrenia: A New Approach. This is Journal of Mental Science, 1952, April. This one does not mention adrenochrome by name yet, because they had not come out with that adrenochrome hypothesis in public until 1954. However, it mentions direct similarity between the indole structures within mescaline and the indole structures within adrenaline. And the hypothesis is that adrenaline can decompose into another substance, which would then be analogous to mescaline. So this is them slowly figuring out and pinpointing adrenochrome as a psychedelic. 1953, this is not going to be a scientific paper. This has been documented by multiple sources. 1953, Aldous Huxley, the writer, he begins conversing with Dr. Humphrey Osmond, and in one of these letters, he asks him specifically for mescaline, which Humphrey Osmond does give him in May. And there, I'm suggesting that in May, Dr. Humphrey Osmond is the one that tells Aldous Huxley about adrenochrome at their meeting, because immediately after, when Aldous Huxley publishes Doors of Perception, this is the first time the word adrenochrome makes it outside of scientific journals. It makes it out into the public right alongside mescaline, described as another hallucinogen / psychedelic. Let me ask you here. I'll keep going. I want to take a break, but I also want to at least get ground rules where could we interchangeably use the word psychedelic for hallucinogen, psychotomimetic, psychogenic, just because depending on if it's the military writing a paper, if it's the scientist writing a paper, or if it's someone else speculating, they bounce between those different words. So I don't want to get caught over semantics that like, well, this paper said hallucinogenic, not psychedelic. Is that a fair concession for both of us?
I don't think I'd agree to that because they're fundamentally different things. And when I'm going to be honest, I knew nothing about this subject until Sarah asked me to debate this a week ago. And I've spent the last week going down more rabbit holes than I could wish to ever re-enter. And when they mentioned the psychedelics and the hallucinogens, they seem to be talking about fundamentally different aspects of the research.
Fair. I'm just trying to save us both a little bit of extra time, but I'm happy to cite the exact words used by the exact papers, even though ultimately I think materially, if we're talking mid-century psychedelics, that the blanket term is fine. A fun fact that John Smithies or Humphrey Osmond is the one that coined the term psychedelics, but he coined it after the discovery of adrenochrome and never retroactively applied it.
Hey, Sarah, there's a guy in my chat that says you're looking into his soul. Could you stop that?
Okay, so here's the MK Ultra connection, and I wanted to make it very clear that 1952 is when the adrenochrome as a psychedelic research started, specifically with Scottish Rite funding, because in 1954, when they published the adrenochrome hypothesis, it says at the bottom of every page, thank you to the Scottish Rite Northern Jurisdiction, 33rd Surgery Council, yada, 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 along with many other papers that I'm not going to list right now in this exact moment, but these papers on adrenochrome specifically mention thank you to Scottish Rite funding. Now, it came from a blanket of dementia praecox, but Dr. Nolan Lewis was the one that decided whether or not you got funding. And when Dr. Abram Hoffer and Osmond were trying to find funding for adrenochrome, first they appealed to some Canadian organization and they were shot down. And that's when Dr. Nolan Lewis stepped in and said, I can find you guys funding, which led to their presentation, which led to their funding. So here's a direct example of adrenochrome funding specifically being given by the Scottish Rite, not just blanket because it happened to fall under dementia praecox. 1954 is when they first published their public findings. We also find in 1954, a month later, in September 30th, MK Ultra document 184362. This was titled National Meeting of the American Psychological Association. And in this specific paper, they mention adrenochrome alongside mescaline, LSD, as increasing interest with experimentation in pathogenic drugs. So here's one of the words that they use, but this is a MK Ultra document that specifically cites this meeting where they're talking about it. You're like, okay, so a bunch of people talked about it at a meeting. 1955, there's an artichoke document, 184434. The title is redacted, but under the title it says report and other interviews from April 1955. This cites a Mayo Clinic meeting, April 7th to 8th, 1955, and it says, quote, during a 2-day visit, this writer was able to introduce discussion of many subjects of interest to artichoke. Page 12, adrenochrome. The writer mentioned adrenochrome and related substances as possibly psychogenic agents. They were possibly of interest, but stated not exactly how they could be used. 1955, the exact same year, this is the video that I originally sent you, where the CIA had a declassified training document where on video, the trainer basically tells a classroom of 8 field agents that they're developing an antipsychotic agent that can counteract the effects of mescaline and adrenochrome. He uses those in the same phrase. So out of those 3, we've got more, but out of those 3, this proves that the only people that were looking into adrenochrome as a psychedelic were Hoffer, Osmond, and Humphreys, and then it immediately shows up same year in MK Ultra research. Unless you have evidence that someone else was researching in this angle, that's the only source that the CIA documented would have got these ideas from.
Okay, but that's still not a chain. There's no actual connection between the Scottish Rite and the funding and MK Ultra, just because they both did the research and certain people that were maybe connected to both institutions does not mean that therefore the Scottish Rite funded MK Ultra doing adrenochrome research. That's just being in the same proximity and doing the same research. Of course, ideas are going to hop across from one to the other because people look at other people's research papers and stuff. But that does not mean that the MK Ultra was a direct continuation of the Scottish Rite funded adrenochrome research. I mean, like I said, I'm not denying that there was there's about $5,000 worth of adrenochrome research funding, which in the 50s, I guess, was a sizable amount of money.
It was far more than that. There was, I know what you're citing. This was a claim that Dr. Abram Hoffer said 5,000 was the normal cap in which that they could get funded, but in reality, they got funded something like 23,000 that first year. And
is there any documents to back that up?
What's that?
Is there any documents to back up that there was more than the 5,000?
Absolutely, yeah. The document is in the Orthomolecular magazine from 1990, volume 5, number 1, page 3. Specifically says, our initial investment in 1952 was $23,000. Our total
that was
expenditure,
from Canada, not from Scottish Rite.
Our total expenditure was less than $2 million between 1952 and 1967. This was the 20-year funding that Dr. Nolan Lewis got them for adrenochrome.
Yeah, but with respect, my friend, that wasn't Scottish Rite funding. That actually came from a Canadian Medical Board, not from Scottish Rite.
Well, despite that, the papers that were immediately put out on adrenochrome.
Okay, sorry, I've got to stop you there. Despite that is the point. You can't just say, well, this person was involved, therefore they did the funding. You have just admitted that that wasn't Scottish Rite funding. That came from a Canadian Medical Board, and which was nothing to do with the 33rd degree Northern Jurisdiction Scottish Rite. The Scottish Rite, at the most, funded about $5,000 of adrenochrome research, which was more to do with dementia precox than actual adrenochrome. That just kind of was part of the research overall. There's no evidence to suggest that the majority of the funding came from the Scottish Rite. And the paper that what you're citing specifically mentions is from a Canadian Medical Board, nothing to do with the Scottish Rite.
Well, I guess we needed to double check both of our research, because from Dr. Abram Hoffer's words, he originally tried to get that $20,000 funding from the Canadians, and it was not approved. And that was when Dr. Nolan Lewis came into the picture, and then they gave their presentation in 1952 to the Scottish Rite Supreme Council, which immediately resulted in them getting funded. I guess the argument
not by
here,
the Scottish Rite, though,
whether the Scottish Rite gave them $5,000 or $23,000. But does the difference between how much the amount was negate the fact that they were the only 3 scientists that were publishing and researching adrenochrome as a psychedelic?
Well, yeah, because your claim is very specifically that the Scottish Rite funded the majority of the adrenochrome research, but there's no evidence to suggest that. Yes, the initial request from the Canadian Medical Board was rejected. But then when the second doctor, like you just said, came into the picture, he went back to the Canadian Medical Board and they then approved it. It was nothing to do with Scottish Rite funding. The Scottish Rite at the most, and there's no actual documents to say that they even got that $5,000 from the Scottish Rite. It was a possible grant that would be awarded. But the majority of the funding came from the Canadian Medical Board, not from the Scottish Rite.
I feel like this might be splicing hairs, but I'll splice the hairs with you, because I feel like there's a good enough point that I can make even on the back of what you're trying to get at. So
it goes against your claim, though. Your claim is the majority of the funding was from the Scottish Rite. But it wasn't. The Scottish Rite did not give that $23,000. That came from the Canadian Medical Board, not from the Scottish Rite 33rd degree Northern Jurisdiction.
Let me continue to steelman this claim then. So Dr. Nolan Lewis objectively was only in the position to negotiate who's getting funding on dementia praecox research because he was the field director by the Scottish Rite. Is that something we can agree on as an objective fact?
Yeah, but just because certain people have jobs doesn't mean that's where the funding came from. The funding did not. This isn't even arguable. This is a fact. The funding did not come from the Scottish Rite. I believe I've got to nail this down. I've got to nail this fact down. One of the main claims that you're making is that the Scottish Rite funded the majority of adrenochrome research in the 50s and 60s, and that is factually incorrect. It came from Canada, not from the Scottish Rite.
If we're quantifying the majority of research in terms of who put the most money on the table versus who had the most impact and led to the most lasting long-term research, I think unequivocally it's still the Scottish Rite. The Scottish Rite is still...
But that's not what funding is. Your claim is that they funded the majority of the adrenochrome research, not what had the largest impact. That's something you literally just at this moment tucked in because I've torn apart your evidence, which is loosely thrown together.
Well,
the fact is, it is a fundamental, unequivocal, unarguable fact that the majority of the funding did not, in any way, shape, or form, come from the Scottish Rite Freemasons. It came from the Canadian Medical Board.
So I want to restate the original premise here. Freemason-funded adrenochrome MKUltra research relates to blood magic, mind control, and psychedelics. When you were restating that claim in your opening, you inserted the word magic a few times and conspiracy a few times. I know for hyperbolic effect, but to be precise with words here, the majority of funding isn't necessarily part of the prompt. But before we started this, I sent you some of my overall notes, and that was included. The context was that there would be no adrenochrome research in the context of psychedelics without the Scottish Rite having originally funded that. And even if you want to make an issue that the Canadian board gave them 23,000 while the Scottish Rite gave them 5,000. The conduit between both of those was still Dr. Nolan Lewis, who would not have been in that position to negotiate anyone get any adrenochrome research had it not been for the Scottish Rite putting together the committee and appointing him as field director in the first place. So here you have a Freemasonic agent, a liaison that is coordinating any funding related to adrenochrome, specifically if we're talking about Dr. Abram Hoffer, Osmond, and Smithies.
Yeah, but dude, a lot of people were Freemasons. So just because a particular Freemasonic agent was involved in the coordination of the funding still does not mean that came... Sorry, let me finish. It still does not
go ahead.
mean...
Hold on. Yeah, Craig, go ahead and finish your thought and then back to you, Paranoid.
It still does not mean that the Scottish Rite were the one that funded that research. And that was part of your major claim. That was in the questions that I asked and the answers that you gave. That was part of your major claim, was that it was the majority of the funding came from the Scottish Rite for adrenochrome research, and that's factually incorrect. Like I said in my intro, just because a university hosts someone that says a thing does not mean the university backs up that person's claim, or that because someone does cancer research and then one of the people involved in that cancer research goes off on a tangent and does something else, that all cancer research then relates to that. Just because one guy that was involved was also a Freemason, but also connected to the funding, does not mean that therefore Freemasons funding it. You have to acknowledge and you have to concede that no, the Freemasons did not fund the majority of the adrenochrome research. Can you concede to that or not?
Absolutely not. And in fact, it's the opposite, because
you're operating in bad faith then.
The adrenochrome research was originally created and presented to first directly to the Scottish Rite. After this presentation in 1952, the Scottish Rite formal report is when they got funding from the Scottish Rite and from Dr. Lewis in order to do the next 2 years of research. When they published the adrenochrome hypothesis in 1954, they specifically thank the Scottish Rite Northern Jurisdiction 33rd degree for funding that research. So to say that it's factually wrong that the Scottish Rite Masons did not fund that adrenochrome research when the paper specifically cites the opposite of what you're trying to claim.
Okay, I didn't say they didn't fund any of it. I've agreed to the
Hold on. Craig, let him finish this out, and then I'll let you.
My bad. Sorry. Apologies.
If your intention is to discount that Freemasons started and continued and contributed the most important part of that funding, because there's a difference between one person donating 23,000 and another donating 5,000, which I do not concede that that's correct. But even if I were to concede that, because Group A donated more than Group B does not necessarily mean that Group A had more impact than Group B, because the original funding came from the Scottish Rite, and after they were able to get momentum, they're able to attract funding from other groups, again coordinated by the Scottish Rite's liaison, Dr. Lewis.
But again, the majority, it's just a fact that the majority of the funding didn't come from Scottish Rite. Even if they did the original bit of funding, which then made other people go, oh, maybe we should also fund this. Well, it still doesn't hold to the fact that the majority of the funding, or even the most important part of the funding, came from the Scottish Rite. The most important part of the funding would be the largest amount to actually do the research. And that was nothing to do with anything Freemasonic or the Scottish Rite or the 33rd degree Northern Jurisdiction. It was a Canadian medical board. Nothing to do with the Freemasonic Lodge or anything. There is a very loose connection. There is a broad, in the same postcode happening here, and you're just grabbing it and smashing it together and going, well, therefore, it's the Scottish Rite. And I'm obviously not going to convince you that that's not the case, because that's stuck in your head. But anyone that can do the research can see where the majority of the funding came from. And it was unequivocally, unarguably, undebatably not from the Freemasons.
And I think it's a false equivalency to cite the amount of money somehow dictates the amount of research that was able to conduct. For example, if you're trying to raise money for a startup, you've got different seed rounds, right? Somebody that comes in your initial seed round might not invest as much because you have a lower evaluation of your company versus a seed B or a seed C round, in which your evaluation maybe goes up. So now external sources have to come in and basically pay 4, 5 times, 10 times as much as multipliers than the original investments. I would still argue those original investors are far more important to the brand or the service that's being established, and the ones that come later and just happen to pump more money in.
Yeah, again, that's exactly what it is. And it's not a fallacy to say that the person that gave the more money was the more important one, because that's exactly what it is. Without the money, the research couldn't happen. And again, you can try and smash this together as much as you want, but it's not going to make it stick. The majority of the funding did not come from the Scottish Rite. Can you concede the majority of the funding did not come from the Scottish Rite? Because that's
I'm not going to see that, because I don't have, unless you can present the exact research that is completely discounting what I say.
I will hand it to you. I've got,
okay,
it's all over the place at the moment, but even you have said that the Canadian board were the one where the 23,000 came from. That's out of your own mouth as well as mine. So we both know from both of our research that is the fact. But because I've caught you in that, and you're trying to smash them together, even though they're separate, you literally are unable to separate them. If you're an honest debater, you have to concede the majority of the funding did not come from the Scottish Rite. No one is denying that some came from the Scottish Rite, and no one's denying that maybe the beginning funding and the seed came from the Scottish Rite, of that 5,000, which is what they would get. And they said that they don't give over 5,000. That's why they went to the Canadian board, were rejected, and then after someone else got involved, they went back to the Canadian board and they got 23,000. So 23, I'm just doing my maths in my head here, but I am positive that 23 is more than 5. Can you at least agree to that?
Will you cede that 23,000? If I am not ceding, because I'm not admitting I'm guilty here, but I'm not ceding that. But let's say if I did, hypothetically, if I were to cede that point, would you cede that 23,000 was only secured due to Dr. Nolan Lewis?
I don't know exactly why it was ceded. He wouldn't have been the only one. There was a board. All right. He may have been the one that went and asked for it, but no, it's not just due to him. The entire board has to agree that that's the case. Maybe this doctor gave a very convincing argument, right? But no, it's not just because of him. But you are avoiding the fact, you're hiding from this very, very hard. You're hiding from the fact that the majority of the funding did not come from the Scottish Rite, which, let's be clear, was a major portion of your claim.
Again, let's restate the claim. Freemason-funded Adrenochrome Mkultra research relates to blood magic, mind control, and psychedelics.
Yeah, and that's why I asked you very specific questions. I passed to Sarah very specific questions to give to you. And those answers that I got back in it, you cited very specifically that the majority of the funding for adrenochrome research in the 50s and 60s came from the Scottish Rite.
I believe the phrasing was different.
Incorrect.
The phrasing was the majority of adrenochrome research was funded by the Scottish Rite, which in my mind is not saying they provided the most dollar amount, that they provided the most valuable money at the earliest point. Again, with the analogy of a business that's going through multiple seeds funding, the first seed funding is far more important, because if you don't get the first seed funding, the company never makes it to round B and C.
With all due respect, my friend, that's not what the majority means. And your words were very specifically the majority of the funding. All right. Now we are going around in circles here. Anyone can go and look at where the majority of the funding came from, and anybody can see that the documentation clearly states that the majority of the funding did not come from the Scottish Rite. Whether there's a loose connection or not is irrelevant to the fact of where the majority of the funding came from. The majority of the funding came from a Canadian medical board, not from the New York 33rd degree Northern jurisdiction Scottish Rite Freemasons.
I think I have the question and answer if you guys want me to read it.
Yeah, please.
If it helps. And Craig, correct me if I have the wrong question. I believe this is the right one. Are they claiming Hoffer and Osmond's adrenochrome work was funded mainly by Scottish Rite Freemasons, despite Hoffer saying his first major grant application was to Canada's Department of Health and Welfare, and that Scottish Rite Committee seldom gave grants over $5,000? Is that the correct one?
Yeah.
And then the response was the claim is that adrenochrome research was initially funded by Scottish Rite along with other dementia, is it Praecox research?
Praecox, yeah.
Once the research started to get legs, of course, Hoffer and Osmond and Smithies and others received additional funding, mainly via Rockefeller Foundation and later Macy and others. Is that the right one, I think?
So there's something else that asked about the majority of funding as well.
I'll keep looking.
I mean, I didn't mince my words in that response, and the point that I'm making is that it was the initial funding by the Scottish Rite Freemasons which made any further funding viable, which even gave legs to their research to begin with, because again, adrenochrome being derived from adrenaline meant that there was very little that could be patented. So there would be no monetary incentive for the pharmaceutical industries to fund adrenochrome research. It was squarely on the shoulders of the Freemasons because they were essentially taking charitable funds and donating it in a way that did not necessarily have to turn profit.
Okay, just a quick off the cuff question though. Are you aware that you can synthesize adrenochrome in a lab outside of adrenaline? Did you know that?
Yeah, it can be derived from petrochemicals as well. Yeah, it can be derived for any of the required precursors, essentially.
Yeah, I just wanted to know if you were aware of that. I think I mean, that's not really necessarily important to the question, but it was something I came across in my research that I thought was very interesting. That almost makes the entire thing pointless when you look back at it, right?
How so?
Because then you don't need to actually a lot of the dementia precox research and the derivative of adrenochrome from adrenaline was where their research was heading, but that wasn't necessary when you can derive it chemically in a lab, right?
But there would have been no point to focus on it or derive it from a lab if first they had not detected it in the bloodstream of people. And then eventually even the sources they got it, which weren't from petrochemicals originally, it usually came from industry runoff of auxin. And they would basically just use the adrenal glands and turn that into a mash paste and then do a slow extraction process. So just to nip in the bud, there's no claim that I'm making that adrenochrome has been synthesized or harvested from human beings or babies or anything of the sort, that originally came from blood. It was detected in the bloodstream of schizophrenic patients, and that was what led to it even being a topic of interest. And then after technology develops over the next 2 or 3 decades, they do figure out you can derive this from other precursors that don't even require biological material anymore.
Okay, so did Hoffer and Osmond receive Scottish Rite money for the adrenochrome work, or did they just present their adrenochrome hypothesis to a Scottish Rite committee, or was it both?
It started with them presenting their adrenochrome hypothesis to a small group of Scottish Rite only that were the board of this dementia precox committee, facilitated by Dr. Nolan Lewis. After the presentation,
is presenting to a committee the same thing as being funded by that committee?
It is if that committee directly funds you after that presentation, in which the paper that you publish as a direct result of that presentation 2 years later specifically cites, thank you to the Scottish Rite 33rd degree Supreme Council for the funding. I would equate that as, yes, they funded that research if they were given credit at the bottom of the paper itself.
Can you name the grant, the amount, date, receipt, and project title for the Scottish Rite adrenochrome funding?
As you go on your next diatribe, I'll look up exactly what the
I don't think I've gone on any diatribes. I've simply asked questions. With all due respect, sir, you've spoken 87% of the time.
To refute some of the other things that you were mentioning.
Yeah, but so yeah, with respect, you have spoken like 87% of the time, and I've allowed that.
Okay, well, let me cede the floor to you then for your next question.
Well, I just did that. Can you name the grant, the amount, the date, receipt, and project title for the Scottish Rite adrenochrome funding?
The paper was the adrenochrome hypothesis. This was, and let's see, adrenochrome hypothesis was 1954 by Hoffer. Then they released multiple revisions of this adrenochrome hypothesis called Revisited. One in 1957, one in 1959, another in 1960, in which Hoffer and Osmond collaborated again. They also republished it in 1955, 1959, and 1960. And then
okay, that was a paper. I've asked if you could name the grant.
I don't have the grant in front of me as we're talking at this exact moment. No. Are you saying that did not happen, even though they cited thank you to the Scottish Rite for your funding of this project? Is having the amount of the grant making?
No, I'm just saying that you don't have a funding trail for the specific adrenochrome claim.
Does them in the paper citing thank you for the funds not constitute a direct chain?
Not unless there's a grant paper and receipt that we can see.
I don't understand why the paper itself citing the Scottish Rite as being the funder for that paper is not acceptable as evidence.
Because there would be a grant attached to it. And I'd like to know what the grant, the amount, the date of that grant, and the project title. If it makes you feel better,
I'll cede on this because I don't have the grant paper. I have the paper that they published that specifically says the Scottish Rite funded it. So unless they were lying or just giving false credit for undetermined reasons.
I appreciate the seed. Right, let's move on to, because I don't want to just go around in circles on that. So the next question I've got for you is, what specific MK Ultra document says MK Ultra continued Hoffer and Osmond's adrenochrome research?
Okay, well, first I want to see if you'll cede on one point, is that there's no other published documentation that I was able to find, and I assume that you were able to find, of American scientists studying adrenochrome as a psychedelic, hallucinogen, psychomimetic, psychogenic, whatever term you want to call it, that it was Dr. Abram Hoffer, Smithies, and Osmond that specifically were researching this as a psychedelic.
In the 1950s and 60s, no, but come the 70s, 80s, 90s, there turned out to be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds doing it. I'm not going to deny that Hoffer and Osmond were the ones that spearheaded the discovery of the adrenochrome compound in blood and everything, and then were the forefront of that research in the 50s and 60s. Of course, someone has to start it. The research has to start somewhere. Someone has to discover the thing. But that doesn't mean that then there is a direct trail between Scottish Rite funding adrenochrome research, which was actually mostly funded by the Canadian government, to then MK Ultra continuing Hoffer and Osmond's adrenochrome research. And that the prompt is that the MK Ultra relates to the Freemason funding and everything. So we do need to move on, and I need to get the answers to the question, what specific MK Ultra document says MK Ultra continued Hoffer and Osmond's adrenochrome research?
Okay, let me just cite this one again because I had mentioned it earlier. So I'll restate the MK Ultra documents. One of them is document 184434. This is actually related to Artichoke, which would have predated MK Ultra. It's part of the same mind control. There was Artichoke and Bluebird and Often and MK Ultra. It's specific.
Well, we're just talking about MK Ultra, so let's just stick to specific MK Ultra documents, and not. Let's be clear, not mentioned, not related. What document specifically says that MK Ultra continued Hoffer and Osmond's adrenochrome research? I don't want random conspiracy soup. Well, they mentioned this here, so that's obviously that I want it to literally say, in an MK Ultra document, that we are continuing the Hoffer and Osmond adrenochrome research. Could you present that is
a disingenuous request. Just
I really don't care if you think it's disingenuous. That is what I've requested.
Yeah, go ahead, Paranoid.
The very nature of MK Ultra research is that we didn't know about it until it was declassified in church committee hearings. And then even as recently as this year, more FOIA requests are releasing more and more MK Ultra documents. So if you look at MK Ultra declassified documents, the doctors' names are blotted out. The actual locations in which these take place, they are blotted out. It's basically this reverse engineering forensics that have slowly formed a picture of, okay, when they mention this person and other non-redacted statements mention a doctor was in a certain location, they went to the Mayo Clinic on this date, and now there happens to be a CIA report from the Mayo Clinic on that date, you can surmise that that doctor was part of that. But within CIA MK Ultra documents, they were not listing specific names. Here's the reason I wanted you to see that Dr. Abram Hoffer, Osmond, and Smithies were the primary adrenochrome researchers into the psychedelic context in the early 50s specifically. Let's hone down.
I've already seen that. Yeah.
1952 to 1954. Okay. So in 1954,
even up until the 60s, let's be clear, it was up until about 63 that they were the main researchers, right?
Fair, but just to make it easy, 1952, let's say before the 60s, just the early to mid 1950s, this is the exact time in which MK Ultra documents from 1954 and 1955 are specifically citing adrenochrome alongside mescaline as a psychomimetic and as a hallucinogen. This research could only have come from Dr. Abram Hoffer, Smithies, and Osmond. So now, while they don't get credited by name in these papers, there is such a small, minute chance, I agree it's a non-zero chance, but that anyone else was doing this particular research because it had not been funded by anyone outside of Dr. Nolan Lewis.
But you also can't say for sure that you also can't say for sure that it wasn't other people because there's no names involved. So just to be clear, there is no specific MK Ultra document that says MK Ultra continued Hoffer and Osmond's adrenochrome research. Is that true?
It's true that they do not name them in an unredacted fashion because the MK Ultra documents, whenever a doctor's name is mentioned, it has been redacted. So it's impossible to unredact a redacted document to prove those. I would make a strong suggestion here, though, that nobody else was publishing or researching this information. So unless you have an example of somebody else that was also researching this in 1952 to 1954, which you've already seeded, nobody was.
But let's be clear, the burden of proof doesn't fall on me here. You have to, the burden of proof is fully on you to show that it was a continuation directly of their research. And you have already said that you can't provide that evidence. So we can't say for sure that it was. And as a man of science, I'm not just going to go with, close associations and say that that makes it factual. You're more than willing, you're more than welcome to do that in your own mind. And if that's what you want to do, that's cool. But we can both agree that there is no specific documentation that says that MK Ultra continued that adrenochrome research from Hoffer Osmond. It just doesn't exist.
That final qualifier is the only part that gives you any sort of leverage here, because no, CIA documentation did not say we're continuing this research from Dr. X and Dr. Y. That was specifically the type of information that gets redacted from CIA documents. So if you're asking for an unredacted CIA paperwork that specifically notes the doctors by name, it's not going to exist. I don't
know if you realize, but that just kind of destroyed Mr. Argument.
Yeah, let him finish.
Let me finish my point.
Sorry, he talks a lot.
You keep seeming to reorient this towards a beyond reasonable doubt claim, and I cited in my opening that this is a probable cause style argument, and the same legal precedent that the government would say if we can prove conspiracy in the context of tools, funding, meetings, substances, then that constitutes enough logic to convict somebody. I mean, I'm operating off that same. So if I can show that the same players were involved, that the money coming from certain organizations were involved, that the research was not being done by anyone else, then immediately that next year shows up in MK Ultra papers and further in artichoke papers declassified in the last 10 years, that there's no other explanation of where the CIA got adrenochrome on their radar, as nobody else was looking into it as a psychedelic. I'll see that they don't have paperwork that says Dr. Abram Hoffer gave this us, but there is no other there's no other option on where they would have got these ideas had it not been for the adrenochrome hypothesis.
But we have no proof that there wasn't other people doing it either, because the names are redacted. Right. So anyway, again, this has become circular. We've established that there is no direct link between MK Ultra continuing Hoffer and Osmond's adrenochrome research, because we don't know what it says. Right. So let's just move on to the next question, which is a very important one. Was adrenochrome merely mentioned by the CIA, or was it tested?
So I want to just, this is not circular. I just want to restate the main claim does not say from Dr. Abram Hoffer and Osmond and Smithies. It just says Freemason-funded adrenochrome research. So I don't. Yeah, but they were the ones doing it. If they started that research and they began the focus on adrenochrome as a psychedelic, anyone that picks up the torch from there, again, within the same years in which they're releasing their first public findings, Are you suggesting that another unnamed entity snuck in the span of 2 months between they published the paper and then documents in the CIA's artichoke that says adrenochrome was something that they were looking into? Unless you have a specific claim on who else was doing it within that span of 2 months.
No, I don't, because I don't hold burden of proof to find any specific claims. I just have to point out the holes in your connections. As someone in my chat has very, it adequately pointed out, probable cause grants a basis for more research. It is not proof. So back to my question, was adrenochrome merely mentioned by the CIA, or was it tested?
So the video that I sent you, which was the MER-17, this is the closest that we basically have that the CIA itself was interested in adrenochrome and the effects of it on field agents. Again, the nature of CIA MKUltra documentation is that they did not keep an exact dosing log of here's the amount of this chemical that we gave to this person on that date. Those were specifically the types that Richard Helms had burned and not stored away. Most of the CIA paperwork that was released by the Church Committee hearings is basically money documentation, who sent a certain amount of money to which institution at a certain date. What we do have, though, are examples in that MER-17 video where the CIA specifically says that they're working on this MER-17 antidote if you're dosed in the field by some sort of a hallucinogen, and he lists mescaline or adrenochrome. Maybe he was citing a paper that he had read, but we don't really have any insight as to whether or not they were actually researching and injecting people. I would say that the overwhelming evidence of MKUltra shows that if it was on their radar and they had access to synthesize something, there was really no barriers in between, okay, now let's actually test this on someone. I don't have paperwork for that because of the nature of MKUltra papers.
But that is just a claim you're making. And this video you showed me, they literally just mention it in the same phrasing as mescaline and barbiturates and other stuff like that. But there is, and I want to be clear here, there is absolutely zero documentation or evidence or papers or logs or anything that says ever that the CIA administered adrenochrome to human subjects in MKUltra.
Because that's not the nature of what CIA MKUltra documentation survived until the 2020s. What we have are CIA document 184434, which lists it along all of the other drugs that they were currently researching, which included LSD, mescaline, serotonin, mushrooms, harmine, and adrenochrome by name.
So it's implied.
It's implied, and it's
so
implied
not proven,
that the only reason that adrenochrome would find its way onto a CIA document between the years of 1952 and 1954 would be a direct result of Hoffer, Osmond, and Smithy's research into that subject, as they were exclusively researching that in terms of publicly accessible papers.
What MKUltra sub-project number involved adrenochrome?
This was the sub-projects were not fully revealed. I believe there's 149 that were documented, and some of those have been so heavily redacted that all we have is the sub-project number and not the actual name at the end of it. So we do have sub-project.
I wrote down you'd say that.
We do have sub-projects that facilities which were being the same facilities used by this, but no, there is not a MKUltra sub-project which cites adrenochrome. We have more MKUltra documents. Here's another one.
Dude, I love you. I literally wrote down that you'd say that.
Okay, congratulations.
Destroyed records explain why evidence may be missing. They do not become evidence. What evidence do you actually have?
Did you want to finish that thought, Paranoid, before you?
Sorry, I apologize. It's literally the words he said. I wrote down the exact. I literally wrote down that he would say that. It's brilliant. I predicted it in advance.
Specific documents. So I'm providing the documents again. If you want to write these down, so I don't have to repeat them for the fourth time. The other one is 184362. This one again specifically cites mescaline, LSD, and adrenochrome all next to each other. My point here is that, of course, there's not going to be MKUltra documents that survive with exact dosage and the exact victims. This would have been a legal nightmare, and this is the exact reason why so many of the papers burn. I would like to, before we proceed, just to get good faith from you, would you agree that a majority of MKUltra papers were destroyed by the government?
We don't know the majority. We don't know how many.
Were any MKUltra papers destroyed by the government?
Yes, but destroyed records explain why evidence may be missing. They do not themselves become evidence, right? Does a CIA video mentioning adrenochrome prove a research program Or does it just prove awareness of a compound?
It proves that they got that research directly from Dr. Abram Hoffer from 1952 and 1954.
Wait, that wasn't my question. My question was, does a CIA video mentioning adrenochrome prove a research program, or does it just prove awareness of a compound? Because there's no evidence that MK Ultra and the CIA did research on adrenochrome.
Well, that's not true. If it's in an MK Ultra paper and someone is giving a presentation on it and describing its effects, that in itself constitutes research. What you're talking about is human experimentation, which is not the same as research. Research includes things that you're looking up, reading latest papers from other sources. It's not that if you read 500 reports in a medicine journal, you're personally recreating all 500 of those experiments. No.
I think you're confusing awareness with research. Mention a program, just pick one. Which one had, the CIA specifically researching adrenochrome? Not just mentioning it, which very specific CIA/MK Ultra program talks about research of adrenochrome?
Okay, maybe this is just a semantic issue. So let me ask you, if I were to ask you to research Christopher Columbus, is that a possible request, or is that an impossible request to research Christopher Columbus?
No, I can absolutely research Christopher Columbus. I'm aware of Christopher Columbus, and I can research Christopher Columbus. They're very different things. If I mention Christopher Columbus in a paper, that doesn't mean that I have therefore researched him. There is lots of CIA and MK Ultra papers and documents that mention an awareness of adrenochrome. There is zero MK Ultra or CIA documents that mention research or carrying on the research from Hofstra and Odsted of actually doing research on them. Awareness of a compound does not constitute research of that same compound. Just tell me one program, one single CIA or MK Ultra program where they specifically say that we are researching adrenochrome.
I want to strongly make sure that we can agree on this term of research. Yeah, if you were to write a report on Christopher Columbus, what's the difference between you mentioned his name versus you actually researched him? It would be if you understood it within the context and you brought it up within context and gave additional information. So for example, document 184434, the fifth time I've mentioned this, verbatim, it specifically cites that page 12 has an entire section on adrenochrome in which it's related to psychogenic agents. No, it doesn't say, and we dosed it with this person. However, this would not have been mentioned alongside mescaline, LSD, harmine, all the other psychedelics if it had not had some research that proved that it was related to these psychedelic experiments by Hoffer. So Hoffer does the experiments on people and animals, shows that it is a psychedelic / hallucinogenic, depending on your context. That research then gets cited in CIA research. This is a very typical trend in which a researcher will cite another researcher's work without redoing their experiments.
So if the CIA mentioned aspirin in a training film, would that prove that they continued an aspirin research program?
If that aspirin had only been researched by one other group of scientists in a specific context of psychedelics, then yes, I would say that if a group of 3 scientists were the only ones in the early 1950s that were looking into aspirin as a psychedelic substance, and then the CIA has a paper same year or after that's also talking about aspirin as a psychedelic substance, I would consider that a continuation of that prior research.
I don't think anyone else in the world would.
Maybe
what you're doing is very standard conspiracy thinking. Well, they mentioned it alongside that thing, and there was these people that were doing it, therefore they were also doing research on it. No, it doesn't. If the CIA mentioned aspirin in the training film, that would not prove that they were continuing aspirin research, even if doctors involved in that training film had done aspirin research.
The only doctors. Even if they were the only doctors that had ever done aspirin research, and they then mentioned aspirin in a CIA training film, it does not mean that then the CIA are conducting aspirin research. It just means that they mentioned it alongside other things. And they did. They mentioned adrenochrome because they were aware of it. They were aware that it had research as being a possible psychoactive substance, that it had been cited in psychopharmacology. It had been looked into as a possible psychoactive substance. That does not mean that MK Ultra or CIA continued that research. They were just aware of it being researched. That's it. That's the connection. That's the entire thing. That's the story. You are making the leaps
of, well, these doctors were the only ones doing it, therefore the CIA must have been doing it. That's typical conspiracy soup, jumping to conclusions because you want there to be a connection, nothing more.
I'm saying that the continuation of adrenochrome research does not require the government to then repeat the same research that they're using to consider this as valid within the context of their program.
Not repeat or continue. There is no continuing research. There's no evidence that there was research. There's evidence they mentioned it, but that's it. That the paper that you keep citing it. What number is it?
I feel like I shouldn't have to repeat it for the 6th time. I gave you many opportunities to write this down.
I don't have a pen with me. I'm sorry. Just
okay. 184-4334 is one of them.
184. All right. That number that you just said, guys. Everyone, go and look up that paper, and you can clearly see that there's no mention of doing research. They simply mention the compound, and they mention the compound because it was being considered as a possible psychoactive. But there is nothing, nowhere in any documentation, in any paper that exists in the history of the CIA or MK Ultra that suggests that compound was used in any kind of research.
That's too grand of a claim to actually be true, that there's no document in the history of MK Ultra for one that likes to tack qualifiers
that we have access to. Let me clarify. There's no paper in the history of the documentation of MK Ultra or CIA research that we have access to that wasn't destroyed or that is available that shows that there was any continuation of the research done that originally started with the Scottish 33-degree Northern jurisdiction, Scottish Rite, right? You are just making a connection because they mention it. All that paper does, that paper simply mentions it. It could mention cocaine, it could mention heroin. It doesn't mean that these things were being actively tested or researched on. It just means they mentioned it.
However, again, the qualifier here is that cocaine was known to many scientists and in many contexts. The only reason that the CIA had adrenochrome on their radar was because of this Freemason-funded Dr. Abram Hoffa research. It was literally public. It was only made public the exact same year, months before the meeting in the CIA, in which they have the exact same information.
So it lived in the same postcode, is what you're saying?
I believe, again, if this is a probable cause,
I believe. There we go, guys. He believes. That's all we need.
I believe that if we're following, again, my legal precedent here is that if the cop pulls you over and you've got all of the tools to commit a robbery, but he has not, found you in the act of committing the robbery, he doesn't have a black book that says, I'm going to rob this person at this address on this date at this time, it doesn't mean that they have to let him go. So I'm using that same
actually, unless they could show
I'm almost done.
Sorry,
I'm using that same probable cause style to my argument versus a beyond reasonable doubt, which requires a red hand for like an actual footage of somebody committing the crime. So, I mean, if you're not able to concede that there's legal precedents that allow for probable cause versus beyond reasonable doubt.
Just because a cop pulled over someone with a crowbar and a bunch of lockpicking equipment does not mean that they have the legal right to hold them, and because they think they might possibly be going to at some point, maybe possibly in the future, commit a crime. No, that's not how that works. There could be many reasons why someone could have equipment that might look like they're going to rob something. They might be a locksmith. They might be an engineer doing a very specific thing. You're misquoting how legal arguments even work. The probable cause does not equal a guaranteed thing. It means there is maybe more investigation to be done. But if a cop pulled over someone that had a crowbar, a lockpick, a roll of duct tape, and a flamethrower, does not mean that they could hold them because they think they might be going off to rob someone. Especially if there's no evidence they'd ever robbed someone before. That's what you just said is a factually incorrect statement.
Ironically, the precedent for conspiracy in a legal setting is if you have the tools, funding, meetings, and context. If you have all of the elements to commit a crime and then intent can be proven, then that a conspiracy charge is literally a charge that the crime did not already take place. Funny enough that it's the word conspiracy, right?
Yeah, but also intent. There's no proof that there was intent. That's the thing. Intent can be implied all at once, but unless there's evidence that the intention is actually there, that there is, some kind of actual legal chain of events that would lead to this person being convicted of a crime, nothing could ever happen. and you are just making loose connections because they mentioned the word adrenochrome in a paper.
You're basically mispresenting this. It's not just somebody mentioned adrenochrome in a paper. It's that adrenochrome was. Let me finish. It's that adrenochrome was not a known term or substance to anyone outside of this small group of researchers as a psychedelic. And especially before it made it into Aldous Huxley. Once it hit Aldous Huxley, then everything is off the table because anyone could have read it in a book, and now they know about it. This is before that happened. So the only place you would have read about adrenochrome as a psychedelic in 1992 or 1952 to 1954 would have been for these three guys investigating it as a psychedelic. It later immediately comes up as a psychedelic in MK Ultra research. MK Ultra research, a large majority of that research was about using psychedelics in order to enhance interrogation techniques, basically altering the mind's perception. So the fact that it's being researched as a psychedelic, it's not published publicly yet, and then the CIA is also publishing it in its internal paper, at least 3 different documented papers, plus a training video, all citing adrenochrome as a hallucinogen. You are correct. They're not specifically saying, and we gave it to this person. They have in that video, someone took one of the other drugs and was given the MER-17. So the implication is that if they mention this alongside the other drug, then they're part of their research.
So let's be clear, you're using implication, you're using possibly, you're using it was there, you're using reference because you don't have evidence for researched or used.
Correct.
You are making leaps, and you can make these leaps all you want, but everyone watching can see that they're just leaps and there is no definitive connection. Yeah, it might be implied, it might look suspicious, but looking suspicious is not evidence of guilt.
I actually believe that I believe that criminal conspiracy charges do not require the same level of scrutiny and documentation that you're requesting here.
They absolutely do. You can't charge someone if there's not evidence.
From specifically a program that is famous because of how secretive it was.
But there we go. It's secretive. Therefore, there isn't evidence that you could definitively use as proof of anything. You are just making claims that are too vague to evaluate. That's all you're doing here. You're using reference because you don't have evidence for used. You're making claims that are extremely vague, so we can't actually look into what they are. You are saying they mentioned it and because it had not been mentioned before. Of course it hadn't been mentioned before because it hadn't been discovered before. And CIA were at that time interested in drugs that could be used as hallucinogen for many reasons, because they were doing horrific, horrible experiments on publics. And they were thinking, what other things could we use? They mentioned hundreds, maybe thousands of drugs that could possibly be used as hallucinogens, and adrenochrome was just one of those things that they mentioned. That does not mean that there was research into it or it was used in any way.
I actually think that you're making my case for me better than I could, because as you're restating this, we've clearly shown the connection of the Scottish Rite making the initial, and I would argue most important funding of adrenochrome, which then gets it on the map. Then the adrenochrome researchers take funding from the Scottish Rite and develop the adrenochrome hypothesis in 1954. So with this Freemason-funded adrenochrome, let me finish. With this Freemason-funded adrenochrome hypothesis, that research directly goes into 1954 MK Ultra papers. No, it doesn't cite in those papers that they were also injecting people with adrenochrome, because they were leveraging the research that had just been done that year along with the rest of their experiments. So here's a connection between Freemasons funded adrenochrome research as a psychedelic. The MK Ultra gets a hold of adrenochrome as a psychedelic. There would be no mention of adrenochrome in MK Ultra papers had it not been for Dr. Abram Hoffer, and Dr. Abram Hoffer would have not had that research had it not been for Scottish Rite funding. Here's the full connection that I've been trying to explain. Scottish Rite, adrenochrome, MK Ultra. Adrenochrome is the missing link that you seem to be trying to find. That's the link that ties them both together.
But again, there is no link. The names are not cited in CIA MK Ultra research. You even said they're blanked out. And there could have, we don't know if there was, but there could have been other people doing research on it or even mentioning it. The fact is, just because there is a loose connection between certain people does not make a chain of connection between Freemason-funded adrenochrome research and MK Ultra. that the fact is that there is no evidence that MK Ultra ever researched adrenochrome. That doesn't exist.
I believe this might devolve into a semantic issue because, again, if they have multiple papers citing here's what our scientists have gone out into the field and researched, and they've collected this information, them simply looking through medical papers and finding correlations between what they're looking for and other papers, that is the research. So if they cite adrenochrome research and cite adrenochrome in the papers.
Again, mentioning something is not research. And this is...
Then
Sarah, Sarah, I feel like this bit's just going around in circles. Could we please move on to the next lot of questions?
Can I ask a clarifying question before we abandon this?
Yeah, please.
Does looking into adrenochrome in a published paper, because you were tasked with finding psychedelics, does finding that paper, reading it, and summarizing it in another paper, does that not constitute as research?
No, that just is documentation. That's a bibliography.
I feel like, well, we probably won't come to terms on this. It feels like a semantic issue. If I keep
saying semantics, and with all due respect, that's because you don't really understand science.
I wanted to ask a question in terms of the paper, because when you publish papers, right, you usually will cite things. And if you're paranoid, you're saying that the adrenochrome was cited in a
CIA paper.
In the paper, but you're saying that at that time the two dudes that were originally doing the research, I forget their names, Osmond. You're right.
Yeah,
so
Dr. Hoffer,
you're saying they were the only people that were researching that stuff, right? Therefore, anything mentioning would be based on that research, correct?
Unless there is evidence of anyone else that was doing that research. But yeah, that is my position, that if the CIA mentions it, they got it from Dr. Abraham Hoffer.
So I guess my question to that, especially if the science is very limited, wouldn't they footnote or citate something on when they mention the adrenochrome?
So you can look this up on archive.org if you search for MK Ultra Doc 184434. The problem is that every mention of a scientist's name or location has been redacted, as all of the MK Ultra paperwork is expected to be. It's heavily redacted.
Okay, so the citation in itself was...
So the scientists' names might be in there, they might be not, but if they're in there, they're covered up with a black marker.
I've looked, they're not.
They're not. I'm looking at it right now. You're saying it's not redacted?
Is there
no, their names aren't in there.
Is there like a footnote, like a citation number on the word adrenochrome?
No, this was a collection of notes from a 2-day conference at which has been suggested to be the Mayo Clinic, but that also is not necessarily proven. But it's a list of the page of notes of things that were covered at this meeting. So it doesn't end with citations. It's basically a collection of everything that had been talked about.
So there's a scientist in my chat, a very good scientist that actually uses gravity and satellites to look for stuff underground and stuff. And he says that he's pointing out that reading literature is not research, it's called literature synthesis. So it's literally in science, not defined as research.
I don't agree with the appeal to authority with citing that doing
appeal to authority doesn't mean going to experts. That's not what appeal to authority is.
I asked you previously that if I asked you to research Christopher Columbus, you would be able to do that.
Well, yeah, but I just want to clear up. You just said this appeal to authority. No, going to an expert in a field is not an appeal to authority. If I said King Charles told me that it's not research, that would be an appeal to authority. But going to an expert in science to ask about what research is would not be an appeal to authority.
To be fair,
I just want to clarify
that I don't know their name of and I don't know their credentials, so it was an appeal to authority unless there's actually more to go on that. But again, you cited before that if I asked you to research Christopher Columbus, you could research him. So what are you doing that's different, that's not just literature sightings?
Well, if I was to research him, I could do something like actually look into his travels, look into cross-reference it with other things. If I just wrote about Christopher Columbus because I'd heard about it, that's not researching Christopher Columbus. With all due respect, you don't know what research is, and I think that's part of the problem here. But I would like to move on to my next line of questioning, if that's okay, regarding blood magic.
I did pull up literature synthesis if you want the definition of it, but it is a thing out there. It is a process of combining findings from multiple sources to create a new cohesive understanding of a topic rather than merely summarizing individual studies. And it goes a little further, but I just wanted to throw that out there. I know. I never
say that literature synthesis does not count as research.
They're not the same thing.
Common knowledge?
Effective synthesis organizes literature by theme, methodology, chronology to build a persuasive, structured argument.
So it's just organization of facts, not necessarily research.
That sounds like semantics. That sounds like research to me, but that might, maybe I'm not classically trained enough in specific research techniques, but I would say consulting multiple papers and then trying to formulate a new argument based on the things that you read in other works, that constitutes as research.
No,
it says it goes beyond summarizing, describing one source to analyze relationships between studies, demonstrating comprehensive critical evaluation and original thought. I don't see anything about research.
That's fundamentally different to actual what research is. But that's a side argument, and I would really just. I've only got 90 minutes before I have to have a hard stop, so I would like to get through all my questions if that's okay. So my next question, blood magic was part of the prompt, and I asked you about it in questions before the debate. And the phrase blood magic is where your conspiracy soup kind of gets extra chunky. What does blood magic mean as a factual claim to you?
Blood magic is probably the main reason that adrenochrome is even relevant or talked about in 2026. So it would be disingenuous to not include it in this conversation. And my argument here is that adrenochrome ties to blood magic in so many different relative ways. It does not prove blood magic because I don't believe in supernatural. I don't believe in magic itself. However, the argument is that this is not an arbitrary thing that a fiction writer just decided to plug onto adrenochrome. And furthermore, its association with blood magic usually is used as an easy out for some debunker to come and say, aha, conspiracy theory, magic, you don't know what you're talking about, and then dismiss the entire concept of adrenochrome.
Yeah, so my question was, what does blood magic mean to you as a factual claim?
Blood magic to me is something that if you believe in supernatural, it means that the very nature of containing or extracting blood or using blood, has some sort of supernatural qualities to it. Now, I mean, Arthur C. Clarke, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So I would say that if you were to tie back the clock and say people drinking blood or doing horrific blood rituals, that these were traditionally associated with magic, and that there were claims of blood having some sort of a psychological effect drinking it from somebody. So the fact that those have been documented throughout history, not scientifically proven, but documented through history, now you have adrenochrome. This is an actual chemical extracted from blood, couldn't be taken from human blood, and has been proven to be psychedelic. It is the first thing that gets extracted from blood that has evidence of being psychedelic, which now you have a secular chemical substance that can represent the same claims that had been made against blood magic and blood ritual. Now, if you are secular and you're not religious and you don't believe in supernatural, it ends up becoming a vehicle to represent the exact same claims.
That was a massive lot of conspiracy soup. Are you claiming blood extraction happened?
Am I claiming blood extraction has ever happened? Absolutely, yes.
Within the context of what we're discussing.
Within adrenochrome research, yes. Blood extraction.
Are you claiming human sacrifice happened?
I don't believe human sacrifice has happened as part of adrenochrome research, no. But human sacrifice and blood magic tend to be indistinguishable once you get into the 2026 conversation of adrenochrome and QAnon.
I would
and
disagree with that entirely. Are you claiming some kind of ritual practice happened?
No, I'm not.
Are you claiming that this is only a symbolic language?
I'm claiming that it's only symbolic to people that are secular. If you are not secular and you believe in supernatural, then it's not necessarily symbolic. To some people, this is a very real connotation. That's not my belief.
So which one are you actually defending tonight?
that the blood magic relation to adrenochrome is not arbitrary, and that the fact that it exists gives everybody an easy out. Any debunkers an easy out to dismiss what sound very provocative. If you say adrenochrome research wouldn't exist without the Freemasons, people's red flags go up. They're like, oh, he's a conspiracy theorist. Then you mention that it was part of MK Ultra. Even if it wasn't tested on humans, documented by MK Ultra, it is in multiple MK Ultra papers. That also sounds like an easy out for someone to say, aha, conspiracy theorist. So the blood magic correlation, which goes into the QAnon and the Pizzagate, that has been retroactively added by media in order to discount the first two elements of this adrenochrome topic. And it's not coincidental and it's not arbitrary. And I can show the exact evolution of how that came into being.
Okay, so if blood magic is not supernatural and not literal, why are you using the phrase except to kind of make the claim sound scarier?
Because that blood magic and adrenochrome, it's the only thing that makes adrenochrome relevant as this conspiracy theory. Nobody would care if it were a substandard psychedelic, but the fact that it gets associated with blood, as it associated with blood magic, that is the number one reason that it shows up in magazines and on TV and gets cited by the ADL and attracts debunkers that basically are chomping at the bit to disprove the first two and focus on the latter of those, as in like blood magic, therefore the associated with blood magic discounts that. The association with blood magic starts with the actual original 1930s adrenochrome research, where they were extracting blood from schizophrenic patients. They detected higher levels of adrenochrome in their bloodstream, and that led to some hypothesis that it was the adrenochrome itself was acting as a psychotomimetic, meaning it was making people mimic having psychosis. This gets picked up in fiction in that people now are starting to steal blood from schizophrenic patients, inject it into themselves. That gets melded into... That goes Terry Southern, The Blood of a Wig, 1967. He wrote that. That ends up becoming swallowed by pop culture and media. And then all of a sudden, the dialogue between is adrenochrome Freemason-funded or is adrenochrome a psychedelic that was involved in MK Ultra, those don't get the attention because everyone wants to talk about the blood magic and the Satanism, which again was put there by pop culture. But now it is cited by popular... Cambridge cites this, USA Today, Forbes. There's all sorts of think tanks that actually cite anyone mentioning adrenochrome as part of a right-wing extremist organization, and that you should discount anything else that they say. That is the main reason why blood magic is such an important element of this conversation.
But you realize that's not evidence of an event, that's just interpretation.
No, this is a direct correlation. If you were to look on the ADL's website for the word adrenochrome, it's cited as hate speech because of its mention alongside blood magic, which then gets tied to blood libel, which then turns into a long line of anti-Semitic claims, which mimic the exact claims being cited against adrenochrome right now, which is namely that elites are sacrificing kids and drinking their blood in order to live forever or to become inebriated, which, by the way, in 1994, paper by Dr. Abram Hoffer, again, in Adrenochrome Revisited, he does cite that genetic families that have schizophrenia that run in their family line might be more resistant to chronic diseases than those that don't have it, and that they're also more likely to be in right-brained sort of different inventures. So like the fact that he ends up writing this later on, all of this feeds into this mythology that didn't just happen overnight. It didn't happen from Hunter S. Thompson writing Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. So if you're trying to get me to prove that blood magic exists, no. My claim here is that adrenochrome serves as the perfect vessel for seculars to believe in the same claims that were previously being made by basically anti-Semitic zealots. Now everyone can have a secular thing to all make the exact same claims. And
dude, you've got all the conspiracy words locked down, don't you? It's just like, you know, it's conspiracy word salad. I might have to go and get my ranch. Instead, I'm on a cut, so I'd probably have to use light mayo instead. All right, so what evidence connects any Scottish Rite schizophrenia research to blood rituals? Got any?
I have, I mean, the connection here, again, I'm not proving that adrenochrome caused blood magic. I'm saying that the relation between adrenochrome and claims of blood magic are not arbitrary. If you're asking for a specific documents, well, in the late 1890s, Leo Taxil put out Mysteries of Freemasonry and specifically cited blood rituals, sacrifices to Moloch, worship of Baphomet. I'm not claiming that
that's all been debunked.
Accurate.
You realize that, right? That's literally all been debunked.
Okay, I understand. And that Leo Taxil was a pseudonym and that he was an atheist and he was anti-Freemason and anti-Catholic and did that to basically create a stir between those two entities. But that does not mean that his exact work is still being cited in 2026 as fact. So
like QAnon.
So when adrenochrome comes up, let's just say if you were to even ignore the blood magic aspect, once someone says it's related to Freemasons, sure it is, mate. You know, conspiracy theorists galore over here. Let me get my ranch. Oh, by the way, it was also involved in MK Ultra mind control. Okay, well now I need to get a double dose of ranch, mate. You know, because you're just
like
making
Mayo, dude. I'm on a cut, please.
Then when you add the blood magic aspect, it basically just gives another reason. Like 3 strikes and you're out. We no longer have to discuss the psychedelic or the Freemason elements of this, and the blood magic basically overshadows that. And my argument is that that has been by design. That adrenochrome has been associated with blood libel and with blood magic intentionally and repeated by essentially larger groups, that like mainstream media groups, in order to basically
don't care about them. They're not in this conversation.
Well, what about Cambridge? Would Cambridge be relevant in here, since you were mentioning research and academic studies? So when ADL classified adrenochrome as a dog whistle of hate speech under QAnon, that was repeated by Cambridge. And once Cambridge repeated it, now mainstream media is allowed to cite an academic authority. Here's your appeal to authority again. Well, if Cambridge just said
that's not what appeal to authority means. Goodness. Right. Anyway, I just want to make one thing absolutely clear, though, in this entire conversation, which you seem to have skipped over, and that is the fact that any notion of adrenochrome being psychoactive in any way, or being psychedelic, or being a mind-altering substance, has been completely and utterly debunked by science. You do realize that, yeah?
No, and in fact, the way that you're phrasing that, it's basically did you stop beating your wife last week or the week before? It's a loaded question that doesn't have.
No, it's not. Right. Let me rephrase it then. You do realize that adrenochrome is not mind altering, yeah?
No, absolutely not. In fact,
well, science entirely disagrees with you. Every bit of research in modern science and the compound itself finds that it is absolutely incapable of causing any psychoactive, any psychedelic, any mind-altering perception. It has been entirely 100% utterly debunked that adrenochrome is a mind-altering substance.
I'm actually glad that you phrased it in such an absolute, because that is so easy to dismantle. Let me cite one of the papers from Dr. Hoffer and Osmond. It's called The Hallucinogens.
Okay, so that's from the 1950s and 1960s, and it's been debunked.
Okay, this is restated by Hoffer again in 1994 in the Journal of Orthomolecular Medicine. So just to tell you that you're wrong about that concept, but again, this is from The Hallucinogens, which is not from the 1950s, by the way. Page 268. Here's a specific quote from Dr. Abram Hoffer. The controversy must be an unusual one, of the most unusual ones in science, since every paper ever published so far on adrenochrome showed it was psychologically active and changed behavior in man and animal, full stop. A curious situation resulted in which many who had worked with adrenochrome provided data which showed it was a hallucinogenic, while several who had not studied adrenochrome insisted that it was not. I would argue that you are in the latter half of that group, of the people that have not studied it and then are immediately insisting that it's not psychedelic. The difference, and the reason that most people say it's not psychedelic, they're referring to something called carbazochrome or monosemi-carbazone, which is a shelf-stable version of adrenochrome. This is the one that's used for blood coagulation, eye surgery, all sorts of mundane medical issues. That is chemically different from aqueous adrenochrome, which is an aqueous solution that goes from adrenaline into adrenochrome, and it's only stable for a very brief moment in time. It's incredibly hard to work with. So the fact that it's so unstable and hard to work with, combined with there was no other funding outside of the Scottish Rite and anything coordinated by Dr. Nolan, meant no other researchers were looking into it as a psychedelic because they couldn't basically have someone ship it to them. Dr. Osmond in his own papers basically cites the hubris of these scientists that were debunking him, that they were incapable of making a stable aqueous solution that they could test with. And by the time they tested it, it was no longer psychoactive, and that they blamed the fact that his original researchings were unfounded. So he reproduced this in 1994. This is not something that got debunked countless times and unequivocally true. When you are talking about non-selective adrenochrome, you're talking about carbazochrome, the shelf-stable salted version of it, not the aqueous. Which again leads into the Hunter S. Thompson style claims of you got to get it from like a fresh baby or you got to get it from a human. That was an extension of the fact that it's so unstable.
Right, so mind altering is doing a lot of work here. Caffeine is mind altering, alcohol, mind altering, sleep deprivation is also mind altering. That does not make them MK Ultra blood magic mind control substances. The question is not, can someone report altered perception? The question is adrenochrome a reliable, demonstrated, controllable psychoactive agent? And the evidence for that is weak as piss.
There's 3 separate CIA papers I've already mentioned. One calls it hallucinogenic, one calls it psychogenic, and the other one calls it psychotomimetic. All 3 of those are far beyond caffeine. Those claims are that it perceptively
I wrote that you'd say that
pattern.
So I've literally got it written here. If he says the CIA called it hallucinogen, the CIA repeating or referencing mid-century psychiatric claims does not validate the drug. Intelligence agencies have researched stupid things before. A CIA mention is not a pharmacology review. It is not proof of efficiency. It is not proof of mind control. It's spooky bibliography entry.
So do you
Nothing
have
else.
any?
Are you claiming adrenochrome is a reliably mind-altering in the same pharmacological sense as LSD or mescaline, or are you only claiming some old report said it caused perceptual disturbances?
And before you answer, we're going to go for about 5 more minutes. So start wrapping your points up, and then we'll move into closing statements. Paranoid?
So I'm claiming that the CIA did classify it as hallucinogenic. The original papers classified it as psychomimetic and psychogenic, and it was only not called psychedelic because one of the adrenochrome researchers only coined the term psychedelic 2 years after they produced their their adrenochrome hypothesis. So yes, it has unequivocally been shown to be a psychedelic, and in Abram Hoffer's 1994 papers, he goes to criticize those that tried to debunk his research and basically said that they were not working with aqueous adrenochrome, and
someone criticizing something else is not science. Can you show the modern controlled evidence?
I would prefer to see if you have any evidence that someone actually has done tests on adrenochrome and showed that it was not.
Well, I'm not the one that burden the proof here, bud. Can you show modern controlled evidence? Wait, hold on. My question: can you show modern controlled evidence that shows it is a psychoactive agent in the same vein as LSD or mescaline or something?
Yes. The most recent paper is the 1994 paper by Dr. Abram Hoffer called Adrenochrome Revisited in Orthomolecular Magazine. That is the most recent.
That again, you just said that's just him saying, oh, I don't like that these people debunked me. That's not an experiment.
Something. Are you saying that if I can cite a paper from 1994 where he is explicitly saying it is psychedelic, analogous with the effects of LSD, maybe even operating with LSD,
but it's been tested multiple times?
Let him finish, Craig. Let him finish.
This is an extension of
Sarah.
This is an extension of his same claims in the 1950s. For 40 years, Dr. Abram Hoffer never relinquished that.
Okay, you said that. You're repeating your claim. You don't need to say it again, right?
Now,
you don't need to say it again. Let me respond.
Hold on.
Sarah, you're just saying the same thing over and over. Okay. Let me respond, please.
I'm going to finish this with a question to prompt you to answer.
No, I've got an answer. I'm going to respond to what you said. I'm going to ignore your question.
Hold on. At least... Craig, I know I hear you and I understand you. I want Paranoid to at least be able to finish his thought, okay? And then you can tell him he's an idiot for doubling down and saying the same thing twice.
Okay.
Paranoid, please.
Let me double down and say the same thing twice. Dr. Abram Hoffer for 40 years had research showing that it was hallucinogenic / psychotomimetic / psychogenic, depending on the context, that it affected humans in analogous way as mescaline and monkeys, dogs, cats, rabbits, mice, spiders, all of the above. And if you're saying that that's been disproven, I want you to If you're saying that's been disproven, please cite one paper, one research where someone said, I went out and did research on adrenochrome as a psychedelic and proved that it was not.
You have burden of proof. Everything that Hoffer has said. No, I've just let you talk for like 6 years. Shut the fuck up, please.
It is Craig's term. Go ahead, Craig.
Jesus Christ, man. Everything that Hoffer has ever said has been debunked by every scientist ever that has tested adrenochrome. Every test, every actual test of adrenochrome. And if you want the citations, I can give you 1,000 of them, right?
Give me one.
Shut the fuck up. I am talking. Thank you. Every single test that has tested Hoffer's claims have shown that Hoffer was incorrect. All of them, ever. And Hoffer doubling down in 1994 because he didn't like the fact that other scientists were debunking him is not evidence. That is just Hoffer doubling down because he was wrong and didn't like it. There is no tests that show that adrenochrome is psychoactive or mind-altering in the same way as LSD or anything else. There is no citations that would qualify as modern controlled experiments to determine that that is the case. All it is Hoffer liking his own papers and his own words and doubling down like you are. I don't have the burden here, but I could give you 1,000 citations and more. All right. And well, I will, if you want, after the debate, I will give you so many citations that it will take you 6 months to read them. But anybody can do a basic bit of research right now and see that Hoffer was incorrect. End of story. Debate over.
You're stating some objectively false,
No, I'm not.
Okay.
Let him go,
You're
Craig.
saying that every single thing that Dr. Abram Hoffer has ever studied has been disproven. I
didn't say that. No, you're misquoting exactly what I said.
Hold on. And you can correct that, Craig, when he's done.
Sorry, he spoke so much, Sarah. It's quite hard.
I understand. I hear you. I think he's more filled with the providing the information, right? Which is what you're asking for, is for him to fill in the gaps. And he's doing that. It might take a while since it sounds like there's a lot, but I understand what you're saying. Paranoid, go ahead.
So just to be clear, you asked for scientific papers which cited that adrenochrome was seen as psychogenic. I cited multiple papers, but your response is, well, that's one guy and he's been disproven over 1,000 times. And give me one of those examples in which somebody actually did the test on adrenochrome and said that this is not psychedelic. Because again, Dr. Abram Hoffer himself cited that all of his debunkers happened to not actually research it, would look at the paper and say, that doesn't make sense on paper, and debunk it that way, not actually doing their own research. Because again, research into adrenochrome was not conducive to any industry as it's not patentable.
Okay, so McNeill Office for Science and Society says adrenochrome psychedelic properties are very questionable and that it has no rejuvenating effects, and that the QAnon style claims are baseless nonsense. He also notes Hoffer Osman's reported hallucinations in self-testing, but follow-up studies failed to confirm the treatment claims tied to the adrenochrome hypothesis. The American Chemical Society says adrenochrome is an unstable oxidation product of adrenaline with no practical uses, and that the old theory that it caused schizophrenia was eventually debunked. Hoffer Osman's own later articles say adrenochrome caused perceptual changes, but they were rarely as pronounced as LSD or mescaline. That's useful because even the pro-adrenochrome source that you've been talking about downgrades it compared to actual psychedelics. A 1967 critical review notes that Smithies later retracted support for the adrenochrome theory, and it quotes a broader criticism that despite many reported biochemical anomalies, no single biochemical defect in mental disease has been established in that time. So that was from the McGill Office for Science and Society, the American Chemical Society, Hoffer and Osman's own later articles, and a 1967 critical review from Smithy's own retracted support for the adrenochrome theory. Thank you, you're wrong.
So I'm familiar with the paper from Smithies. That was not recanted by Humphrey Osmond or Hoffer. That was just Smithies.
No, it was. I didn't say it was. It was by Smithy.
Hold on. Okay.
And the additional context of Smithies, as when he basically wrote that he regretted putting forth some of his research in the adrenochrome hypothesis, the context there is that he believed there was another byproduct of adrenaline breakdown, perhaps adrenalutin, which which might have accounted for what they were looking for in this toxin X. So it wasn't that all of the research into adrenochrome was their debunk. It was that he wasn't confident it was adrenochrome specifically. He thought it could have been adrenoleutin or another one that they did not study because the funding essentially ran out. But to characterize that one person, Smithies, that leaves the program.
You want 5 more citations that you're wrong? I'll just give them right now if you like.
Hold on, Greg. We're almost to the finish line.
I mean, you asked for evidence, and I gave you multiple.
And you got one guy. You got one guy. I got about 1,000.
It's 3 guys. It was Abram Hoffer, Dr. Humphrey Osmond, and it was the guy that introduced them to the pink adrenaline. All 3 of those collaborate on this. And as I mentioned, this had been an extenuation from research in the 1940s that was also looking at adrenochrome as a mind-altering substance. But this predated any sort of terminology for hallucinogen and psychoactives that they were currently looking at.
Okay, so JAMA / Archives of Neurology and Psychiatry 1957, debunk it. American Journal of Psychiatry in 1958, specifically the Saza, Axelrod, and Perlin studies, debunk it. The Science Direct / Comprehensive Toxicology Overview, debunk it. PubMed 2003, Synthesis / Analysis of Aminochromes, debunk it. Smithies 2002, debunk it. I've literally got about 1,000 that go against these 3 people, right? I'm in the middle. I'm so sorry that the middle of my sentence interrupted the beginning of yours. I do apologize.
Go ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to point out that.
No, she just said, "Go ahead, Craig." My name's Craig. Maybe you're confused.
I said paranoid.
I just want to point out that in rhetorical tactics and in logical fallacies, what you're offering is called a
no
Gish
logical
gallop.
fallacies have happened here.
A Gish gallop is when you try and cite 1,000 different studies because
you asked me for them. I am doing what you asked me to.
You're not letting me finish. When you're presenting when you literally say 1,000 studies, what you're doing is you're putting the onus for me to now refute every single study that you just brought up, which puts the time barrier on me. Like now you're just saying this person said this was debunked. I clearly
said you asked me to tell you the citations, and I'm telling you the citations. I'm just doing what you asked. That is not a fallacy.
I think a fallacy more on Gish galloping would be I would send you on 12 different rabbit holes.
Well, he just listed 7 papers, but
they were all. Hold on. We're going to clarify this, and then we're just going to move into closing statements. That way, my brain can stop. So you asked like what studies would say this, right? And he's listing. It would be like if I said, how many people are going to be at the party, and you're like, there's John, there's Amber, there's this, right? You're just giving me the list of people that are going to be there. He's citing the papers that would say the debunk. If he was to send you on a Gish gallop, it would be, then also I went over to this university and I talked to this person. And then also for this topic completely unrelated, I went to this university and talked to that person. And then this, and this, you're going like a Gish gallop is 12 different directions about something and completely go in the opposite direction. But here's what we're going to do. Because we'll still get into the Q&A portion. So you guys will actually still be able to continue this conversation and more people will come up and be able to kind of rattle some pieces out even more. So I'd like to go ahead and move into closing statements.
Can I say one thing quickly first before that? Just one thing quickly.
Put it in your closing statement, Craig. We're going to move into closings. I love you. I love you both. We're going to move into closing statements. And then, of course, I'm going to be dropping the link into the chat. So if you in the audience have something to say about this topic, please feel free to start heading backstage and we'll get you up here for open panel Q&A. All right, Craig, we're going to start with your closing statement, please. The floor is yours.
Okay, so let's be brutally honest about what happened here. My opponent, respect you, I appreciate the conversation. My opponent came in promising a grand connection between Freemasons, Adrenochrome, MK Ultra, mind control, psychedelics, and blood magic. Ooh, that sounds massive. That sounds explosive. It sounds like the sort of thing that should come with documents, grant shells, project numbers, funding records, human trial data, and a direct line from Scottish Rite Research to MK Ultra. But what did we get? Conspiracy soup. A few real ingredients, absolutely. Scottish Rite funded schizophrenia research. Hoffer and Osmond had an adrenochrome hypothesis. The CIA looked into psychoactive substances. MK Ultra was real and fucking disgusting. I concede all of that. Because unlike conspiracy theorists, I don't need to deny reality to make my point. But those facts do not prove the claim. They do not prove Scottish Rite funded a specific adrenochrome mind control program. They do not prove MK Ultra continued Scottish Rite adrenochrome research, and they do not prove adrenochrome was operationally used for mind control. They do not prove blind magic. They proved that my opponent found several historical facts, threw them into a blender, pressed nutcase, and served it with a garnish of spooky bollocks. And throughout this debate, we also saw a lovely little trick, the fallacy, which is what I wanted to point out. Anytime I pointed out that his connections were weak, unsupported, vague, or logically invalid, he treated them as if I was saying the conclusion must automatically be false. No, not what I said. A bad argument does not automatically make a conclusion false, but it does mean that you have not proven it. And that's the whole point. If your argument is held together by association, implication, missing documents, undefined terms, and just look at the connections, then I'm not committing a fallacy by pointing that out. I'm pointing out that your bridge is made of wet cardboard and wishful thinking. You do not get to cry fallacy as a magic shield every time someone notices your evidence has the structural integrity of a flat earther's model. The entire case depends on vague language, reference, connected, related, stand-in, implied. And that's not evidence, that's fog. And fog is where weak arguments hide because they look ridiculous in daylight. A CIA video mentioning adrenochrome does not prove a program. A Scottish Rite committee funding schizophrenia research does not prove MKUltra. A researcher presenting a hypothesis does not prove a funding pipeline. And blood magic, meaning whatever is convenient at the time, is not a definition. It's an escape hatch with a Halloween sticker on it. The key question tonight was simple. Show the bridge. Show the direct chain. And the chain was never shown. Instead, we got historical name dropping and conspiracy origami. Fold one paper enough times and suddenly it looks like a dragon. Lovely. It's still paper. And the biggest cell phone that my opponent did was this. When asked what would falsify the claim, the answer was basically nothing. Perfect. Because if nothing can prove you wrong, then evidence is not what you've got. You're not following the documents. You're protecting the conclusion. It's not research, and it's not skepticism, and it's not history. The conspiracy theology wearing a lab coat it stole from a GCSE cupboard. And here's the final verdict from me. The real history is interesting enough, right? MKUltra was real. CIA abuses were real. Mid-century psychiatric research was messy, unethical in places, and deeply wrong. But none of that gives you permission to staple Freemasons, adrenochrome, blood magic, and mind control together like a drunk man wearing a ransom note. The opponent proved there were ingredients. He did not prove that there was a recipe. And without the recipe, this is not a grand conspiracy. It's just soup. Bad soup. Thin soup. Soup with no evidence, no bridge, no falsifiability, and a faint aftertaste of, I watched too many YouTube documentaries at 3 a.m. So until someone can show the actual Scottish Rite to MKUltra bridge, his entire claim fails. Not slightly, not narrowly. It falls down the stairs, hits every step, lands in a puddle of its own citations, and somehow thinks that it's won. This wasn't a case. It was a corkboard having a panic attack. And as usual, with conspiracy arguments, once you ask for specifics, the monster under the bed turns out to be a sock, a shadow, and someone who desperately needs to learn what evidence is. Thank you for listening, guys. I very much appreciate the conversation.
Thank you so much, Craig. I appreciate it. And also, before I hand it over to Paranoid, a kind reminder, if you'd like to join the panel and ask questions, and don't worry, you can wear your tinfoil hat. And even if you don't know anything about the topic and you have questions about it or want some more clarification, that's a great piece to step in on as well. Don't be afraid that the men don't bite, I promise. All right, Paranoid to you.
Don't tell them don't bite. I might bite.
You will. Go ahead.
So I want to commend Craig, did a great job on this, although I disagree with the tactic, which was basically slightly shifting the original claim constantly so that he could qualify it and tack on a few extra words that were not necessarily in the original premise. Let me restate the original premise. Freemason-funded adrenochrome MKUltra research relates to blood magic, mind control, psychedelics. I understand vague and provocative. However, the things that you seem to make the best points on revolved around semantics, whether or not if one company donated more money than another one, then that means that they had more influence somehow. And then some funny but very less subtle ad hominem of like drunks and conspiracy soup and magic thinking. You have this analogy of the bridge and that I built no bridge. I'd argue that I built the bridge and you refused to cross it multiple times because then you started picking a point, well, this isn't necessarily a bridge because a bridge requires rope and you used, floss or whatever the example was. It started to become the shifting goalpost. So I'm happy, though, that usually debate, it's not necessarily to convince you, it's to convince anyone else listening that there's something of merit in here. So again, here was the bridge that I built. Adrenochrome was objectively Freemason-funded, initially Freemason-funded. We might disagree on if someone came in later and invested a little bit more, then all of a sudden now it's no longer Freemason-funded. No, it was initially Freemason-funded. That's what set it in motion. It would not have been funded by anybody else prior to this because it had no monetary benefit to the end of it. B, that adrenochrome was identified in multiple CIA papers, even if just mentioned as a hallucinogen, as a psychotomimetic, and as a psychogen. And then finally, that the blood magic element to this, again, is not arbitrary. It came because this is a drug that was shown to have psychoactive properties that could, in theory, be extracted from humans. That makes its way into the fictional landscape, and over the course of 60 years turns into the QAnon, Pizzagate conspiracy theories that are typically used to debunk this. I want to remind you what my claims were not, because Craig did tend to put a lot of like, well, what you're saying is this, or if it was Dr. Abram Hoffer, it doesn't say that they cited Hoffer's research. But the connections is that there was no adrenochrome research as a psychedelic had it not been for Dr. Abram Hoffer. Dr. Abram Hoffer would have not done that research had it not been for Dr. C. Nolan from the Scottish Rite. And then you would not have MKUltra citing adrenochrome in their research had it not been for those first two steps. So I think that if you're looking for the connection, I don't need to prove CIA unredacted documentation, which does not exist, by the way. Even if we do have CIA MKUltra papers, they are all redacted. So to ask for specific evidence that you know does not exist was a little bit disingenuous. However, I believe I strongly showed that we would not have modern day conspiracy theories about blood magic and adrenochrome had it not been for those first three steps. All of that is objective fact. If you wanted to pick apart things based on semantics and based on if someone got specific credit or if their name was unredacted, then no. I mean, I would have to cede every one of those points. However, I'm showing that in the historical record, these things line up so closely as to not be ignored. And again, legal precedent of a legal conspiracy does not require that you catch the criminals red-handed in the midst of their crime. It only requires that you show that they have all of the elements, all of the resources, and the intent. And again, you would like to point out that, well, we can't ever prove intent. I see that as well. You can't prove intent, especially not when most of your records had been burned and suppressed from the public. And when a topic as controversial as this comes up, that it always seems to devolve directly into ad hominem, QAnon, Pizzagate, flat earth, magical thinking.
Perfect. All right. And again, as a kind reminder, I've been dropping the StreamYard link into the live chat. If you would like to join for the Q&A comment section, please feel free to start heading backstage.
I'm just going to take a potty break back in 2 minutes.
Yep. Don't forget to wash. All right, we're going to get through the super chats real quick. Not a whole lot of questions in here, but there's some fun ones. But we're going to get through those. Paranoid, if you do want to step away as well for a moment and go catch up real quick.
I'm not going to run away. I'm not afraid.
No, I mean, if you need to use the facilities or anything, now would be a perfect time while I'm reading some of these because most of them are just fun. All right. Green Lantern is cool. Shout out to Real Jiffy over on Craig's side. Chief Cheese of Cheddington sent in a big 2. Also says Paranoid is sounding like a man with substance abuse. Do you have substance abuse?
Guilty.
Steve says this guy has the same amount of word salad as Wit. Is that Witsit? Wit? I wonder if that's Witsit Wit.
Guilty.
Real Jiffy says Green Lantern is cool.
If you got to pay twice to say it, it's not true.
Oh, did they pay the first time? The first time was a freebie. That was a free membership comment.
Is that an inside joke that I'm missing about Green Lantern on this channel?
I don't know. Maybe the glasses.
Okay.
Maybe that's and you got like green in the background, or maybe Craig's a Green Lantern fan. I don't know. I'm not sure. PE belongs on a corner selling pens from Cup. Fair enough. Plumpy sending 5 Raging Tomato gifted memberships. Shout out to the lucky lottery winners, and also to say bless you, child. Also to say happy Mother's Day. Thank you so kindly. Spin says MKUltra, is that a beer? Honestly, like that's what I kept calling it, McUltra.
It is a cigar brand.
But yeah, I'm guilty of thinking it, like we were talking about the beer at some point. Not during the debate, like early on when the prompt first came through, and I was like, MK Ultra. We talking about MK Ultra? Plumpy gifting out one more Raging Tomato membership. Richard says, "Dance, puppet, dance." Sometimes I feel like that. Do you guys ever feel like a puppet dancing on YouTube for super chat?
I am just dancing puppet for my fans. That's all I am at this point.
Yeah, well, hey,
dancing monkey maybe.
Dancing monkey. I've said that. I'm like, sometimes I just feel like a dancing monkey.
I don't mind. I dance as much as they want, as long as they don't mind dad dancing.
Dad dancing. Do you wear New Balance shoes with high top white socks and?
No, I exclusively wear Fred Perry and Nike.
Did you call it Nike?
Yeah.
Nike.
Yeah, I know you Americans call it Nike. I call it Nike.
Didn't Nike start here in America, like the brand?
No, I'm pretty sure it was Germany.
Really?
Oh, maybe I'm wrong with that. How do you say Adidas?
Adidas.
Yeah, that's wrong. Stop it. It is Nike because the god is called Nike, but in Britain everyone just says Nike.
That's so weird.
I believe that was an American company.
That's what I thought. I thought Nike was.
Because the famous story is how the woman that created the Nike swoosh got paid like $200 or something for it.
Seriously, that's it?
That was it, yeah.
Wow. I wonder how she feels now about that.
Probably a little annoyed.
That's what happens when you sign on to and you're signing away your intellectual property. Stoops the cat says, "Hi, Tomato Lady." Hey, Craig. Hello, Stoops. You've been keeping me entertained in the chat over on the Craig side, by the way. Shibak says, "Sarah's awesome." I love how your people are sending money to say I'm awesome. This is nice.
Yeah, quite a few of my chats are like, "She's so beautiful."
Aww. Okay, Dr. Apocalypse says they weren't named because it was actually me extracting adrenochrome from flurf brains. Never extracted enough from them to continue the research.
Common misconception: adrenochrome comes from the adrenals, which are on top of the kidneys, and people usually conflate that with the pituitary and pineal glands, and that goes into a whole different angle where usually adrenochrome claims get conflated with pineal gland claims, which gets into true conspiracy soup.
Oh, I like conspiracy soup. And a kind reminder, if you do want to head backstage now to be able to join for the open panel Q&A portion, ask questions, say comments, or just come hang out with us, you're more than welcome.
Can you put the link in our chat, Sarah, and I'll put it into my chat as well?
Yeah, actually, here we go. I'll put in the private chat. Does that help?
Yeah.
And then, so hold on. So adrenochrome, it doesn't operate the same way as your like adrenal glands do. Like when I pump adrenaline, right?
No.
But
it comes from adrenaline. Your body breaks down adrenaline, and as it oxidizes in your system, it converts to adrenochrome, and then adrenochrome further converts to adrenoleutin, and it goes down a long chain until basically it basically turns into toxins and gets flushed out. But the original research was that they found schizophrenic patients with high levels of adrenochrome, and the theory was that they were constantly triggering their fight or flight mentality, and it was generating enormous amounts of adrenaline. Therefore, it would create enormous amounts of adrenochrome, since that was the byproduct. And the original hypothesis was essentially that people that were able to survive that, and that had schizophrenia in the family, that technically they had some ability to convert adrenaline into adrenochrome faster than normal people, which prevented them from having a cardiac arrest.
Wow. So is that, I mean, could you bottle that up for, I don't know, heart patients in a sense?
Well, I don't think you'd want to give it to heart patients. It's been shown to be toxic, have cardiotoxicity to it. So you wouldn't necessarily want adrenochrome in your system if it weren't already there.
Yeah, just having extra adrenochrome is not a great thing in general. All you guys in my chat that have been screaming about how great a moderator that Sarah is, well, why the fuck aren't you subscribed to the Raging Tomato? the link to, the title on my stream, I've tagged her channel. Every single one of you watching the 200 plus on my channel right now, make sure you subscribe to the Raging Tomato, or I'm going to send Daniel Pratt to your house.
Who's Daniel Pratt, and why do we not want him there?
You don't want to know.
Oh.
Just search Flat Earth Daniel Pratt and then cry when you see the face.
Oh, no. It's a flat earther?
Yeah.
No, y'all be weirding me out with them flat earthers. There's reasons why I don't want to host any flat earth debates here. Gary says, "You're awesome, Sarah. One of the best mods out there." Well, thank you. I will take that kindly. Mantis and their new membership over on Craig's End. Welcome to that group.
Whoop, whoop. Thank you.
Dr. Apocalypse says, "Be warned that I may become as dumb as a flurf as his semantic argument, 100% rumor, 0% fact, is starting to make my brain drip out of my ears." That might actually feel good. Like to let it just drain. You know,
there actually is a adrenochrome study, not a psychedelic one, that showed that when they put adrenochrome directly on neurons, it caused neurons to explode. So maybe that could make your brain leak out of your ear.
That sounds kind of fun, actually. Let it just go.
Maybe fun means something different to you, Sarah.
I've hosted a lot of debates. My brain hurts sometimes.
I spent 6 years talking to flat earthers. How do you think I feel?
Now, see, you choose to continue to talk to flat earthers again and again and again. I hope every debate is a new one and a better one every time. Dr. Apocalypse says Datura is far more fun than adrenochrome anyway. And you could just pick the leaves. No need to unalive flirfs for science. What is Datura?
Angel trumpets. That's essentially, I believe, what if you ever have the motion sickness tabs.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's scopolamine. I believe scopolamine is the active ingredient in Datura.
Oh, how do you guys?
Which was another drug used in MK Ultra for enhanced interrogation techniques, coincidentally.
Really?
I mean, basically any psychedelic they were interested in.
Which one is like the truth serum?
Sodium pentothal, along with a long list of other ones. That was actually originally being used for something called twilight birth. I believe it started in Germany, and they would give it to pregnant women, and the pregnant women claimed that they were having these pain-free childbirths, but what's really happening is that they were getting complete amnesia, and they would come to later and forget it was painful, and they found out a side effect of while the women were under sodium pentothal giving birth, they became incredibly candid and sometimes vulgar, and that's what led to it becoming something that started being used in prisons, I believe by Dr. Galbert Heath, and then eventually makes its way into, again, CIA MK Ultra research.
Wow. The rabbit holes of crazy. Zoomicide says adrenochrome is just epinephrine.
Not right. It's a byproduct of epinephrine, which is the same as adrenaline, essentially. They're misconstruing adrenaline is the same as epinephrine. One of them is a patented term of a product, and the other one is just the regular chemical, I believe. It was like an American versus European thing. But adrenochrome is when epinephrine or adrenaline oxidizes.
Okay. Insider says, Paranoid American, don't trust FTFE. He's from Scotland.
One of the few countries in Europe that I might actually trust more than the others. Sorry.
Scotland is fucking beautiful, by the way. It is. I'm not Scottish. I live in Scotland, but I was raised in England. My family is Scottish originally, but I'm British. But Scotland is just the most beautiful place on the planet, without a doubt.
Fair enough. Dr. Apocalypse says adrenochrome is produced by the oxidation of adrenaline. It is mass produced, is commercially available to anyone, and is not a controlled substance.
So the commercially available to anyone is definitely one of the most widespread misinformations out there. Here's the reason, is because we're talking about aqueous adrenochrome, which is not stable beyond like 20 minutes. And if it is transported, I believe it has to be transported in dry ice at like -20 degrees. So what most of the time when people say like, oh, you can buy it on this website and here it is from China and here it is from this Boston lab, that is, if you look in the details, it is monosemi-carbazome or carbazochrome, which is the salted shelf-stable powdered version. It is not the aqueous version. So that this is something that has been misconstrued for the last 60 years in adrenochrome research.
How do you know all this shit? Also, I want to call out all of those talking shit in the chat, especially Shaney. because I know you guys are very familiar with a lot of this stuff. You should be clicking the link and getting your ass on the panel so that we can further discuss with all of you
post the link for
shit
Cheney.
talkers.
I've got 40 minutes before I need to tap out, so get in here, folks.
Yeah. Cheney, the link's in the chat. It's right there. Click it. Dr. Apocalypse says you can't use papers on
ARXIV.
As evidence. It is a preprint server that is not peer reviewed. I could post any insane bullocks to ARXIV. Means, I'm guessing this is nothing.
Nout.
Nout is a word?
Nout is a Scottish word that means nothing.
Oh, okay. Any thoughts to that, gentlemen?
Agreed. Yeah.
Okay. Jim says misinformation, adrenochrome is often heavily misrepresented in modern online conspiracy theories like QAnon, which falsely claim it is a drug harvested from children for immoral purposes. Any thoughts?
Yeah, that's why it usually comes up in media. If you watch like the latest series, The Boys, it has taken a front seat to all of the Starlighters, which are these QAnon right-wing extremists, and they all claim that Starlighters are trying to extract adrenochrome from babies. That is the theory, and it's essentially equating adrenochrome with blood libel, which is millennia-old anti-Semitic conspiracy theory.
Wow, this shit's crazy.
I think the big question is Homelander versus Invincible. Who would win?
Ooh,
Invincible.
Yeah, obviously.
Dr. Apocalypse says, just ask 4 AIs, checked ARXIV, Google and Wikipedia, and they all say adrenochrome is not hallucinogenic, psychoactive in any way whatsoever.
If all the AIs say it, then I guess it's absolutely true, because that's the new burden of proof, is if Grok and ChatGPT both agree on something, then that's truth now.
All right. Jim says, dear Freemasons, thank you for the Mayo Clinics and all of the children's hospitals you have built. Thank you for all of your contributions, past, present, and future.
I mean, thank you. I've been a 32nd degree Mason for over 15 years.
Oh, wow. Space Lord says the adrenochrome guy kept saying it was a totally real, contrary to the evidence. I am shook.
I mean, but when we say real, of course adrenochrome is real. So do you see how some of the criticisms, they end up becoming so vague that there's actually people out there in our waking lives that they think adrenochrome as a whole is not a real thing. And that's such a dangerous mentality, to where we've just proven that it was Freemason-funded, to the degree of which maybe we didn't necessarily agree on, but it was Freemason-funded, objectively true. It was cited in MK Ultra documents, objectively true. Maybe or maybe not, they weren't researching it. But to then say adrenochrome is totally real, no, that's not. I mean, there's no qualifiers there. Yeah, adrenochrome is a real chemical. Adrenochrome has been documented. It's had all these claims leveraged against it.
Okay. Basil says, FTFE, did the Freemasons fund your Fred Perry fetish? I had to look that up before I asked, because I was like, who's Fred Perry and why is this a problem?
Basil is someone who really, really hates me and doesn't like the fact that I love wearing Fred Perry. I may be a little bit autistic, who knows, but I found a clothes branding that I think looks good on me, and I can get it cheap from a certain place, so I wear it all the time. And for some reason, that triggers him beyond belief, which means that I'm going to wear it even more, because every time I put on the top, I think this is going to trigger Basil problem.
Oh, poor Basil.
Is this like a European Tommy Hilfiger or what?
Basil, Fred Perry was Wimbledon tennis champion in the 60s and funded a sports clothes brand called Fred Perry, which is kind of it's known as the non-uniform uniform. And I love wearing it. I've got Fred Perry shorts on, a Fred Perry top. I'm wearing a Fred Perry cap. I own about 25 Fred Perry tops, and a whole collection of Fred Perry caps. And for some reason, that triggers certain people.
If you're ever looking to mix it up a little bit, I've got some Paranoid American shirts. I'd be happy to send you one if you can wear it around proudly.
Aww.
If you buy one of my merch, I'll buy one of yours.
Done.
Why don't you just send each other one for free, and then you could both not
my
lose
shirts are
out.
$300, so I'm assuming his are a little bit less.
Oh, okay. Mine are like 20 quid.
Did you say $300?
I was just kidding. I saw an easy way to make a buck.
Fair enough. Texas Bully Mom telling you all what to do over in my chat. It is Mother's Day, and you did not meet the dono goal. So, as mommy dearest, I should just punish all of the children here. Stoop says, chat, check out the Scottish Rite Cathedral in Indianapolis. Plenty of tours on YouTube. One entryway is exactly 33 by 33 by 33, mathematically beautiful architecture.
Just in case anyone's wondering, Stoops the cat is the token flat earther that I'm allowed to be a mod in my chat.
Aw, poor Stoops. It probably gets picked on a lot. Is this true though? Like 33 by 33 by 33?
Probably.
I haven't heard that, but I mean, it doesn't surprise me if it were.
Fair enough. Real Hard says, if adrenochrome works, then why Hillary Clinton? That will never be answered.
I can slightly answer part of that, and it's
you actually have a reason.
If you go by Dr. Abram Hoffer's 1994 revisited work, which some people think is discounted, but he specifically states that it wouldn't be adrenochrome or schizophrenia in your generation, but a generation removed from you might see the benefits of having non-fatal dementia praecox in your family line, that there is evidence outside of Dr. Abram Hoffer's research that shows that people that have schizophrenia in their genealogy tend to not come up with, like, for example, they did a study on chronic smokers. The amount of chronic smokers that got lung cancer that had no schizophrenia was way higher than the amount of people that had schizophrenia in their family line that also chain smoked. So wild correlation there, but that there is some evidence of it being longevity. And that's not you would take adrenochrome, but it's that you have schizophrenia in your family line. And I guess the ... is that if it is a psychotomimetic, that there might be a correlation there, but that's not for this debate.
Fair enough. RageBot says, yes, please, more FTFE.
She only says that because she's an AI programmed.
Damn it, you little bots. Stoop says bangs are in right now. Yeah, I started that trend. Thank you very much. And of course, Custom Crisis says the whole time I've been thinking of Steve Perry from Journey, where whenever this Perry fetish thing came up, oh, the clothing line again.
Was that the highlight from this conversation?
I think so. I think that's all people took away from this conversation, was that there's a clothing line in Europe that Craig likes to wear, and it pisses off a flat earther. I think that's the entire takeaway of this conversation. All right, and of course, with the big winner, FTFE says Sarah is the best mod, and then he spelled my name wrong, but I still love him either way.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. People always add that H. All right, I've got 2 backstage. That's it, waiting to come up and have the conversation. I wish all of the shit talkers in chat would have bigger balls and get their asses up here. So that
guys, on my chat, I've chucked the come and join the fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, shit talkers. All right, here we go. All right, gentlemen. Let's see. And Josh backstage, if I could just get a quick cam up back there for me. Nobody else. Yep. Thank you. You can go back to Avatar if you want. I'll give you a second if you want to go back to Avatar. If not, just give me a thumbs up and I'll bring you up. All right. This is the Q&A portion. Let's see, Craig, let me put you back up here. Craig, you've been new since we started this. We actually do Q&A first before we go into full-on blood sports. So they have to be nice and pleasant. We're all going to be respectful and have the nice conversation. We're not allowed to interrupt and be crazy. It's the good version of it. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'll actually kick it off to Ben first, because I'm sure you're more familiar with this topic to begin with. So if you want to start with your question, Ben, and everybody else besides Craig, myself, and Paranoid are going to stay muted. All right, Ben, to you, sir.
Thomas, when you were talking about the part where they were during the study, they were looking at mitigating the effects of certain psychoactives. Is the idea then that when you get in these fight or flight situations and you start producing an adrenochrome, that it starts making you act a little more wild, you don't think, things like that? Were they thinking that like a super soldier type program where it would keep people more even keeled and not take them out of the fight? Is that what is that what they were studying there?
I'm going to make some assumptions on this because I watched the entire video multiple times. All they're doing is they're talking about it in the context of you're out in the field and you unwittingly get dosed with a psychedelic like mescaline. Someone injects you with mescaline or slips psychedelic in your drugs, and you realize that just happened, that this compound called MER17, which was later renamed to Frenquil, which you can look up now on Wikipedia as Frenquil, but that if you basically had this almost like an EpiPen, if you had like an allergic reaction, well, if you start having a psychedelic experience, you basically MER17 yourself to snap out of it. And they show somebody that was given LSD and then given the MER17 as evidence that it worked.
I can definitely see why that would be something they would be interested in. I mean, historically, there's been numerous times that armies have been defeated by psychedelics. Like, you know, that it just happens occasionally. You go mix some psychedelics in with their food and they aren't such good fighters anymore. So
my understanding isn't that you would have so much in your system from an adrenaline rush that you'd be having hallucinations, that someone would have dosed you with a significant external amount. I believe that the actual amount, it took like the adrenal glands of 12 oxen to give one person a day's worth of dosage when they were doing the clinical trials. So it's, you can't just like generate the amount yourself to immediately go into that sort of a state, according to Hoffer's research.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Spin, you said pass backstage, but I still, if you had an actual like a question about the science or research behind it, I wanted to at least give you the opportunity. I have like a bazillion questions running through my head. Did you want to try one? Spin? Okay, he's taking a shit. Duck to you, sir.
Hey, yeah, great debate, guys. FTFE, I thought you did awesome.
Thanks,
hopefully it was a fun break to tackle some biochemistry and stuff too, outside of with the core sort of flat Earth stuff. But I obviously do have a question for Paranoid American. So it is so common, like Ben was saying that Ben was saying this already, that adrenal fatigue, just these epinephrine style events in our lives are so common. And it's also the case that, who knows, like the way we look, the pigment in our skins, basically the product of adrenal overload is part of the metabolic pathway that exists. So I'm just curious if you're telling people that, these stress symptoms, things like inflammation and heart disease, which can compound our fight or flight response, and the fact that there actually is physical morphology that's expressed from from the pathway of adrenaline and stuff, why would I take adrenochrome research to be from the CIA? If it does not have to be from the CIA, is that a smart thing to say?
I'm not sure what you mean about from the CIA. I believe that the adrenochrome research happened outside the CIA, and then the CIA basically did a continuation of it. They started incorporating it into their various research programs. So the CIA never would have got their hands on it if it hadn't been from Hoffer researching it outside the CIA, outside the OSS actually at that time. The CIA.
That's not the CIA, right? And so some dipshit that has and this as well, I don't know if you believe it, but some random guy who discovers that this is a more important or more consequential a hormone or neurotransmitter, whatever, and they decide to do research. They don't know what it's about or what to do with it. They don't know where it came from. They don't know if this has been around since the Middle Ages. It would make sense that somebody is researching this and somebody doesn't know why they should be researching it. And so you're telling a political story versus telling a actual story in the world.
Well, I guess again, my correlation between those two and absence of an actual document that says we, the CIA, paid this person this amount on this date to get their research from it. It hinges solely on nobody else was researching the psychedelic nature of adrenochrome in 1952 through 1954, and then it immediately shows up in CIA documentation from 1954 directly after that. So yeah, there's a huge jump that I'm making between those two, but I feel that the historical context gives way more leverage to that jump than to say like, oh, somebody just mentioned adrenochrome in a setting. No, if somebody mentioned it, it would have ultimately come from Dr. Abram Hoffer. And to point out to the psychedelic aspect of it did not hinge on Dr. Abram Hoffer's research originally. They specifically cited that they were basically looking for an indole that was inside of the human body already that would have the same effects as mescaline. And that's when Dr. Hutchian in 1952, I believe, he mentioned that there was these adrenaline sprays that were starting to turn pink, meaning they were going bad, and that the soldiers that were using these pink adrenaline sprays were reporting hallucinations. So that initial observation of this pink adrenaline is causing people to have hallucinations is what got it on the radar for Dr. Abram Hoffer even to begin with.
The banana for scale is, you can also say that soldiers report having been fucked in the ass by their drill instructor. And you can also point out that adrenochrome, this is something that maybe rose with industrialization. So it's not just hundreds of thousands or singular numbers of people. It is, in fact, billions of people across multiple generations who this research would have possibly applied to. And I don't know why a government would give a fuck about some guy that willingly wants to go shoot guns and drive a tank, or is concerned about going to school, not going to school to reveal the truth about GMOs. Nobody gives a shit. So I do believe that the larger problem that the OSS and then CIA, which recruited women shortly after, one of their first actual memos was about recruiting women and balancing this organization out. I do believe that any research about human physiology would be applying to the industrial era and would be very specific, political, and securitized. I don't believe that there would be a conspiracy. Thank you. I don't have anything else. If you want to respond, I'm happy to, whatever.
I appreciate that. I think those are great observations.
Cool. Thanks.
I'm surprised, FTFE, you didn't pick up when he said, yes, I recognize I made a huge jump from point A to point B. Like, how are you not yelling and screaming at Paranoid right now for that one?
Because I've done the shouting and screaming during the debate. I thought this is where other people could shout and scream.
Oh my goodness. I would have I don't know. I would have probably shit myself. Josh, to you, sir. Question, comment?
All right. Well, so as far as I remember, the first time I ever heard of adrenochrome was Fear and Love in Las Vegas. Any of y'all remember first time y'all have ever heard of it?
I think that might have been mine as well. The movie, not even the book. It was the movie.
Yeah, me too. I mean,
I was curious, Sarah, have you seen Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, the movie?
Mm-mm.
So this is, I think, where it becomes popular to a large majority of people in like normie pop culture. It's because the whole premise of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is Johnny Depp is doing every drug known to man. He's Hunter S. Thompson. And in the middle of his drug-addled adventure where they're doing
a literal suitcase full of drugs.
A briefcase full of every drug you could think of, and like halfway into the movie they come out with this tiny little vial of like red something, and he basically says this is adrenochrome and this is the strongest thing that you could ever do. So the fact that Johnny Depp, after doing a briefcase full of drugs, is talking about how this thing is more powerful than anything else he'd been doing, that's what kind of puts it on this national stage, because everybody watching this movie is like, what the hell drug is adrenochrome? What do you mean it's more powerful than any other drug that he just did? So that's kind of what makes it popular. That's where I heard about it.
And then other than that, it doesn't pop up until like what, Pizzagate?
Cool. I've got a long list of.
We'll go there, are we? Jesus Christ.
Pizzagate is QAnon is where it sort of like gets what we talk about now in pop culture, but it actually gets mentioned. And one of the famous ones is Anthony Burgess writes about it in Clockwork Orange. It has Adrenochrome in the background of even Kubrick's variation of that, and it's interesting because the lineage.
You're right about Clockwork Orange. I just remembered that. You're right. It does mention it in that.
Ones, but it's not the first one. It goes from Aldous Huxley writes about it in Doors of Perception. Then Anthony Burgess is a avid reader of Aldous Huxley. He writes Aldous Huxley's reference. He puts it into Clockwork Orange. From there, I believe I mentioned Terry Southern, who was a writer on Easy Rider and Saturday Night Live. He writes a story called Blood of a Wig, which is about two guys that break into a schizophrenic unit and steal the blood and inject themselves and claim that they're living the lives of the people that they stole the blood from. Here's part of the supernatural claims that it comes from. William Gibson, the guy that wrote Neuromancer, he had a short story called Burning Chrome, chrome meaning adrenochrome, about taking this drug that basically breaks down and makes you schizophrenic. So like there's many different sites of this before it gets to Hunter S. Thompson. And a fun fact that in the Terry Gilliam director's cut of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, Terry Gilliam claims that he invented the adrenochrome mythology and that it was completely fictional and that it had no basis in any sort of, science, which was a false claim that he had made, but that also gets repeated. Like, oh, Terry Gilliam said that it was all fictional. So it kind of gets retroactively applied despite having 3 or 4 decades worth of research behind it.
Hey, are you still cool with Tommy Truthful?
Absolutely. I love Tommy.
I had seen y'all collab in a long time.
Dude, we've had an episode of Conspiracy Cinema on the Books. We're trying to do The Substance because of its adrenochrome sort of related conspiracy.
I got kicked off Facebook about a year ago, so I haven't, so whatever.
Nothing
so
more for truthful. We still collaborate and talk all the time.
Cool.
I guess I have a question in terms of why is the adrenochrome thing such a big deal? Like, what makes it such a big deal that it was studied, that it could have been a psychedelic, it couldn't have been a psychedelic? Like, what's the big aha behind the curtain of why this was a hush hush or it wasn't a hush hush, or who started the funding, who didn't? Like, why the big deal?
I don't think it was such a big deal back then. It was one possible psychedelic that they were looking at. And when Hofstra and Osman originally presented it to the Scottish Rite Council, they were saying that it could be something that could possibly help with, schizophrenia and things like that. And so they were looking into it for things like that. But then the CIA got hold of it. And because of the reports from Hofstra and Odsted saying that it could possibly be a psychedelic, the CIA were like, well, we want as many psychedelics as we can because, MK Ultra, we want to fuck with people and stuff. So it was one of the things they were looking at amongst all the thousands of other possible psychedelics. But then it's it's more popular now because of like the QAnon conspiracies and stuff like that, saying the elites are harvesting children to drink the Adrenochrome and things like that. And obviously movies like Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas and Clockwork Orange have kind of popularized it. I don't think it was necessarily a big thing back then. It was just one of the things that the CIA were looking into, which has now been kind of repopularized with the QAnon movement and the stuff they're talking about it now. Would you agree with that, Paranoid?
100%. In fact, you made a couple really good points. The first one too is that the satanic connection, mostly, in my opinion, comes from Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. In the book, they specifically cite that they have to get it from Satanists because Satanists have access to dead bodies, especially fresh dead bodies. All this. I'm gonna make a leap here that I didn't bring up earlier because I know that I could get eviscerated by this from Craig, but. It is coincidental. Don't start freaking out yet. But coincidental that adrenochrome research starts in 1942 or 52, 54. Then it objectively shows up in MK Ultra research. And after this, the psychedelic context of adrenochrome research largely dissipates. Now, I'm going to connect the dots since we're in the after hours version. We're allowed to have our tinfoil hats on. That once MK Ultra and the CIA is like, this is on our radar. One of the modus operandis of MK Ultra isn't that they would go to a scientist. Here's an example. I believe it's Subproject 42, where they go to Dr. Ewan Cameron, who did psychic driving. When they go to him, they say, hey, you're doing this research. We're interested in the research you're doing. Here's a whole bunch of money. But before you publish anything public, send us your papers first. And effectively, they're able to get the first reports and decide how much gets released out into the rest of the public. I personally believe that might correlate with part of the reason why adrenochrome as a psychedelic stops being researched right after it's on MK Ultra's radar. All right, tinfoil hat back off.
All right, we'll move into open floor. So
I got one more question.
Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
Do y'all think like maybe this is what was behind half of the Charlie Manson? I mean, because clearly they were all on drugs. All the murders back then. I mean, because he was part CIA. He went to that prison that was ran by CIA.
I don't think that Charles Manson had anything to do with adrenochrome, and I also think that if you wanted psychedelics, if your goal was to get psychedelics, adrenochrome would probably be the last thing on your list, just because of how hard it is to extract, how much you would need to start with, how unstable it is, when you could just use mescaline or LSD and get way more pronounced effects, way more reliable, and it could sit around outside for a while. So
actually, Charles Manson, he was a totalitarian too, right? So he wrote he had intercourse with women, so his sex drive.
Yeah, he ran a honeypot in Hollywood.
His art, his house, where he lived, how he moved, all of this stuff was like against things society presented. So it wasn't. I don't think it's the case that he was on drugs. I think it's just the case he was a guy who rejected society, and then by and large somehow got a violent urge or suggestion into him. So maybe he did have a CIA caseworker, or he was an asset and he didn't even know it. They just suggestion, right? You send a honeypot, like you said. He's not running the honeypot, but you say, hey, you already don't like these folks. We need a news story. So you already got the art, you already got the sex. Why don't you just go to prison? This is the next thing you do.
Well, I mean, it was another thing that they dosed people with LSD back in the day, and I agree with you and everything you're saying. But I mean, I just didn't know if he experimented with adrenochrome or any other things like that. The honeypot people. I mean, because he was clearly honeypotting actresses. That's why all the women he had were so damn hot back then.
It would have been so easy, Josh. That's the thing. It would have been easy. All you would have had to do is buy the guy a breakfast plate.
Well, I mean, hey man, you're right. I mean.
Well,
yeah.
So I guess Paranoid, would they tie adrenochrome outward into anything else conspiracy wise? I mean, the blood magic thing with kids is via QAnon. Pizzagate, I'm guessing, came through. Somebody mentioned that. But I mean,
Frazzle drip, all of this is specifically tied to adrenochrome and the claims that it has supernatural powers of longevity, eternal youth, euphoria. Even some of the more extreme claims are that when a popular pop star goes on tour, that the places that they go on tour to is because they're getting their adrenochrome harvested by some elites. So like if you have, Britney Spears come and do a show in Las Vegas, the real reason she's there is to have adrenochrome extracted so that they can then inject the adrenochrome into themselves, which again is an extension of that Terry Southern short story, Blood of a Wig. It fits on directly on top of those exact claims that if you take the blood of somebody that's crazy, then you become their specific type of crazy for a short controlled amount of time. I don't believe that, but that is where that lore comes from, and you can kind of find some of its roots.
Well, obviously, if you look at Clockwork Orange, it heavily ties it to the more MK Ultra concept, and that one, it's mostly what Thomas has provided for what he's talking about in the experimentation and whatnot. Is kind of accurate.
That's where I was going with my question.
Yeah, they're literally dripping it. They're literally dripping the liquid into his eyes. And then if you've never seen Clockwork Orange, then the guy is a rapist and very violent, very murderous. And so then they show him consistently violent, nasty things while dripping this in his eyes. And then also they play classical music in the background. And then at the end of this, and they hold his eyes open with toothpicks like this, so he can't even look away. He has to continually watch us. Well, then at the end, they take him on stage, and they take a beautiful naked woman and put it in front of him, and he goes to reach for her, and he like collapses and goes into a bad flashback and just can't even control himself and just falls into a pile. And it's the whole MK Ultra concept.
Now, Craig, because you said that you just started diving into this when I brought the topic to you, right? And I'm guessing you had heard of it before, but you hadn't really done any deep diving. What blew you away the most in terms of claims with your research, like things that come from it?
Honestly, it was the anti-science rhetoric coming from supposed scientists like Hoffer, who basically seemed extremely angry that every other scientist on the planet was debunking their work. So when you look at his early methodology, it is more scientific, but as it goes on and more people are refuting what he's saying, his methodology and his scientific, the way he's going about things gets worse and worse and worse. And that really struck me as how much negativity can affect the way that people approach what should be a scientific conversation. Then obviously I started diving into the QAnon stuff a bit more because that kept popping up, and that I realized it was 4 o'clock in the morning. I was like, holy shit, I need to put my phone down.
Now, what with the with him because he is a scientist, right?
Yeah.
Is that kind of a piece where we go wrong in today's society, is when people are scientists, but then, as you said, his work was being debunked and debunked and debunked, and he was getting irritated by it, right? Is this where we end up with crazy conspiracy theories because of stuff like this, where like the method can't be proven again, or it fails every time, or somebody comes out and says, no, that's not right, and here's why?
Yeah, it's when people can't let go of what they thought was like a great thing that they did. Because I think in Hofster's mind, it was a great achievement of his. The Adrenochrome research was like his magnum opus. And honestly, it feels like it drove him crazy that other people kept saying, we can't replicate your work. We can't confirm your findings. And when you look at his papers as he gets older and older and older, it gets more and more conspiracy focused, and a lot of his papers are actually just insults to other scientists rather than him actually trying to continue the work that he was doing. He may have been an extremely intelligent man, I'm sure he was, but honestly it seemed like it drove him crazy how much people disagreed with him. And when you get someone that's stubborn and smart, it can cause problems.
Just to tack on more context there, this was not Hoffer's original hypothesis. This was largely from Humphrey Osmond, and Hoffer was essentially like the superior in the chain of command. So when they publish a paper, he puts his name on it, and he of course adds to this. So any criticisms against Hoffer and his methodology and whether or not he's crazy would also have to be ascribed to Osmond, because Osmond did not walk this back the same way that Smithies does. One other thing about Humphrey Osmond, which I find incredibly fascinating, is that I don't know if you ever see these videos where people they'll go to the store and they'll buy a box of cereal like Cheerios, and they'll punch them up into like a powder, and they'll take a magnet and they'll show like, oh my God, look at these iron fillings. They're trying to put nanobots in your head or whatever, but that you can legitimately find iron, just called fortified cereal. Almost every cereal is fortified. This is considered orthomolecular medicine, and Dr. Abram Hoffer, along with being the main adrenochrome researcher to begin with his name on the papers, he's the godfather of orthomolecular medicine. He's the reason why when you look at the side of a box of cereal, it says that it's got niacin in it and it's got iron added and all these different additives to it. And he's also been criticized that all of that was bunk, that none of his orthomolecular medicine, and that he over assigned the value that having niacin in foods was actually having effect on people. Yet to this very day, you still have niacin added to all sorts of cereals. So I would say that just because his work was criticized and quote unquote debunked, it's still being actively incorporated into the American diet to this very day, specifically because of his research. That doesn't necessarily prove that it was valid, but it does go to indicate that there was enough research and enough people on board that it completely changed the entire breakfast food industry, because essentially what's happening is that poor people didn't have access to all vitamins and minerals, and that essentially it was causing mental deficiencies. And he realized if we just add vitamin, I think it's B6, niacin, if we just add this and a few other fortifications to shelf-stable cereals, then poor people go crazy less.
Oh my God. Ben, Paranoid, does this happen to correlate with Kellogg's by chance?
Well, I would argue the whole reason that I brought up eugenics in the last episode was because of my adrenochrome research. Because once you get away from the Scottish Rite funding, I mentioned that it goes to the Josiah Macy Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation. Well, this was specifically tied to eugenic research, and the entire dementia praecox was centered on eugenic research. Because essentially what happened is that all of the rich people that had all these resources realized that there was this one disease that was affecting their families that they could not fit, no matter how much money they threw at their schizophrenic child. And that's why it's dementia praecox, meaning early onset dementia, that if your 20-year-old all of a sudden was developing dementia, like, we need to figure out why and fix this. And the solution was we need to weed out schizophrenia and dementia from the general population. So the adrenochrome research kind of starts with dementia praecox and eugenics research, and that's where Kellogg comes in. He becomes another one of the funders for the eugenics arm. But you can't tie Kellogg funding directly to adrenochrome. The timelines don't match up. But the eugenics pool that a lot of that original dementia praecox funding came out of and then later gets handed over to is part of that huge eugenics bubble.
Oh my God. I'm convinced like Kellogg is the devil at this point.
That's kind of like the whole campaign they did with bacon for breakfast. I mean, they got everybody to eat all the kinds of bacon for breakfast, and then they switched it up to smoke cigarettes.
I don't know.
Sarah, I'm gonna take my leave. It is bedtime for me, 1 a.m. I want to say thank you very much for coming to me with this topic. Also, fuck you for coming to me with this topic. Paranoid, I enjoyed the conversation. If you want to talk flat earth and stuff, just hit me up.
I appreciate it. Now go shut the fuck up.
Yeah, you too. And yeah, thank you guys. On my channel, make sure you subscribe to Sarah. On Sarah's channel, make sure you subscribe to me. If you don't, I will send Daniel Pratt to your home. I know where you live. Catch you all later.
Good night, Greg. Thank you so
much. Bye.
Oh goodness. And let me put one staple out here to the audience. Usually I move right into the open panel gauntlet mode, and we switch channels, and then we continue on throughout the night for multitudes of hours. Okay. However, you only sent in 2 on the dono goal. Okay. Only 2. So if you do want the gauntlet, I'm going to make you have to earn it there, or else we'll shut down here in like 15 minutes because I'm not going to spend my time doing all of this work for nothing. So I'll put a timer goal on.
This monkey doesn't dance for free.
No, absolutely. Not today. Not on Mother's Day.
Sarah, can I say something? Can I say something?
Hold on a second.
Simps, open your fucking wallets.
Yeah, so I put down a hit it or quit it goal. Either hit it or I'm gonna quit it. Okay. And I only say that because it is Mother's Day. All right. And I am a mother, and I love hosting debates, and I love going into gauntlet mode, and I love continuing on to crazy open panel dumpster fires and having a grand old time. But it's Mother's Day, and I don't have to if I don't want to.
You want to talk about child sacrifice on Mother's Day?
But if you would like to convince me to head over to gauntlet mode, I will if you hit that dono goal. And you only have 15 minutes to do so. So Paranoid, like, you were linking it into the basically the Kellogg Rockefeller eugenics kind of stuff. Like, at what point does any of this stop bleeding outward? Not just adrenochrome, but more of the Rockefellers, the Kellogg's, the like things that we would have thought would just be conspiracy theories. But the more information we're pulling, the more I realize, like, no, there's no reason for this to be fake at this point. At what point does this bleed out stop? Like, where in society are you untouched from like the control narratives or the I don't know, like the theories that affect us, even like a school system being meant to make us compliant, or doing the 9 to 5s and you know, working for somebody else and all of these other things. Where can you go where you are untouched by any of this? Is it possible?
I mean, if we're talking in the Western world, one of the phrases is the Rockefeller medicine system, the Rockefeller academic system, because they're the ones that essentially helped reinforce the system of degrees and diplomas and certifications, and that if you didn't go to accredited schools that gave these specific degrees and certifications, then you couldn't call yourself a scientist or a doctor or whatever the hell you wanted to call yourself. That is specifically from the Rockefeller Foundation. So it's really hard to separate that. And then if you go into the textbooks that are given to kids in schools, well, guess who was behind that? Ghislaine Maxwell's father was one of the largest publishers of children's textbooks that make it into schools. So I don't know where you can go. Maybe if you move out and hang out with like Ben Balderson, maybe that's the farthest away you can get from the Rockefeller system, I'd say. But other than that, it's like trying to escape microplastics.
Microplastics have a theory, don't they? Like, isn't there a theory behind that?
That's not even a theory. They're finding it in everything. It's just inundated in everything at this point.
Now, how does that happen? Like, how do you define what microplastics are?
Microplastics. Yeah. So we shifted in, I'm going to make up a year. I think it was the 20s or the 30s, but they shifted from deriving plastics from plants to deriving plastics from petrochemicals, because the petroleum that they were getting when they were extracting oil, they had this abundance of this like byproduct, and they realized that they can turn this into these petroplastics. And where microplastics come in is, imagine you go to the grocery store right now, pretty much everything that you purchase is going to be contained in some kind of microplastics. Your fresh veggies go in bags, your fresh cut meat, anything in the freezer aisle, even like a can of soda or something has plastic lined up. You're famous now, Pompey. So essentially, you're surrounded by plastics, and if plastic sits in the sun, it deteriorates, and little chunks of it get inside. You get into a new car. That new car smell, those are microplastics that are floating in the air that you're inhaling. So you're being inundated with microplastics. And if you were to, and I think it's over like 97% of textiles are now made out of plastics. So you can't really get rid of them. And what happens is that if they're on your skin and they're on your food, and if you have a baby and the baby's crawling on the carpet and the carpet's full of plastic, every time a little tiny microscopic piece breaks off and you inhale it, or it gets into your body through any other reason, time release capsule.
I jump in.
Hold on.
Seem like you're in the middle.
Wait your fucking turn.
Shut up, Ben.
Go ahead, Doc.
So I was just gonna say, I mean, yeah, the whole framing at the end, you like told us how you framed it, which is cool. It's great storytelling. But to wit, saying, well, microplastics are coming for you, doesn't estimate what it would actually take to understand where a microplastic comes from, what it is, and why it's just the case that our society has an abundance of, most would say an abundance of plastics within arm's reach. Not just my laptop, but many things in my studio are made of plastics. And so I think there's a difference between knowing and telling an accurate story about the public health risks, as well as the powers that be within economics or power that have made you become full of plastics. There's another side. I think it's all fear-mongering. There's a whole other side of the story, though, that if that's the only part of plastics you care about, then you're constantly going off of a fruitful path, right? A fruitful path. And so I just want to push back a little bit and say this is more pseudoscientific bullshit.
Well, there's actually
pseudoscience. It's out in regular science. Regular science is talking about it.
There's no such thing as regular science.
I don't think we need to really worry about it. I think it's all fear-mongering.
Where it can't be replicated. That's most of the science you dipshits like you believe. But then there's a whole branch of science where they actually replicate what they're talking about.
Not science.
So I've got an example of one of those.
Science.
Here's a repeatable study that I believe started in the 1970s, and they've been redoing this for the last 50 years. The main doctor is Dr. Shauna Swan. I call her Dr. fucking Shauna Swan. And then basically she wrote this book called The Infertility Crisis, and she was able to show a direct correlation with the amount of microplastics in the mother, and when a baby boy was born, the actual distance between the anus and the genitals is called the anogenital distance, that mothers with higher levels of microplastics, their sons had a smaller taint or a smaller grundle, and that smaller grundle within the span of another 30 years would on a linear graph determine a lower sperm count, the testes not descending as far, and basically just overall infertility. And that once they were able to wean mothers off of microplastics and they could see less microplastics in the urine, and then they measure the babies, that anogenital distance grew again. So there is direct correlation that's been repeated over and over again. This is just one of many. This is the one that she tends to focus on because the tagline becomes microplastics are making your dick shrink. Microplastics are turning you into a girl. Like those are like the funny versions that are hyperbolic, but that is absolutely. And the real case of microplastics isn't necessarily like you touch plastic and it gets on you. It's that the plastic that
That's
they
not the
add
story of microplastics. The story of microplastics again is one in the sense you mean it, where someone is there's agency involved. When there's agency involved, the thing that it's about is then about the system or society or actor that is producing the plastic, why they're producing the plastic. Why do we have things in California that warn you of health risks within your products? These are solvable challenges. These are about consumer protections. They're not about pseudoscience. This is reality. And I for one, in this world, I don't know what's more realistic. Is it more realistic that you are a conspiracy theorist who doesn't actually believe you use ChatGPT to research scientific truths? Or would it be the case that these are just unaddressable challenges in a society? Which one is it?
I think it's a false dichotomy, but really, it's not about can we eliminate but we're never going to eliminate microplastics because they are a natural byproduct of the petroleum industry. But the issue is that they add other harmful toxic chemicals to plastics to make them malleable, to make them hard, to make them colored, to make them scented, and all of those things they objectively leach into whatever their container is holding, and that's where a lot of these come from. It's not just that plastic exists, that they're also being added to all these extra compounds that then leak in, and then those turn into endocrine disruptors, where your body is basically seeing the microplastics and the toxic chemicals released from them and interpreting them as hormones, and then causing all sorts of havoc on your hormone system.
It's just a little exhausting when we've got hantavirus and all this other stuff. You know, hantavirus is obviously a big deal. It originated on a cruise ship. We don't know where it's going.
Of course,
next.
dumb fuck believes the shit from TV. Put on your mask, Duck.
That's what I'm saying.
Are you 6 feet away from another human, Duck? Are you
I'm
6 feet away?
Meet the pounce about. He's famous now.
Yeah.
So
shit.
So I mean, now.
Sorry.
If I was to use, let's say, mason jars, right, like the glass mason jars, to
of course, it's a mason jar.
That's what I was just thinking. Like, is this part of the conspiracy too?
No.
But if I was to use a mason jar, like that's glass, right? I essentially, I'm not risking any microplastics getting into the food that I'm preserving in that glass, correct?
Absolutely. And ideally what you're doing is you're trying to reduce the amount of microplastics in your system to a non-measurable level, that they become so minute that it would take a very expensive test to detect them. But most people have such a high amount of microplastics in their system that it can be detected just through a simple urinalysis test. So the goal is that you weed out all sorts of plastics that you come into contact with. You get bamboo things for, bathroom, toothbrush, floss, all bamboo. For anything that you want to store, should either be in silicone or it should be in glass. But that once you introduce plastics, you are guaranteed to be introducing some sort of microplastic level to your system.
Yeah, the two big ones for your food that are a problem is aluminum and plastics. And I remember as a kid when they started using plastics as everything. It used to be your pop was 16 ounces and it was in a glass bottle or 12. Right. And then they moved to plastic because it's cheaper to make. They make better profits. It's cheaper to haul. You don't have the weight. So it's better for them. It's not better for us. And then they also switched over from using like cast iron and stainless steel to aluminum, and metal vaporizes off, just like on a light bulb and in a filament light bulb. The way that filament gets thinner and thinner over time, it does that to your aluminum pans and whatnot when you're cooking with them. And so that aluminum's vaping right into your food. Mm-hmm. And so these two things are a real problem but most of society is like dipshit duck. And anything that's actual, like Thomas is just citing actual science. And he's like, pseudoscience. And pseudoscience is where you can't replicate it. It's things like this idiot believe in.
Project Shaney, who's a big chicken shit because she didn't want to come up here and ask questions. I'm calling you out on this one. Shaney.
Well, she did do a super chat.
Yeah, took you long enough to say something.
The way I look at it is if I'm going to die by drinking my beer and having a good time, fuck it. I don't know. I drink out of a beer can.
Well, and also, I mean, if you look at the trajectory of how many plastics we're using right now, like the chart is just starting to just go vertical. So we're not even at the starting point. We're just barely taking out of the driveway on the amount of plastics we're about to use. And 100 years from now, it's probably going to be like 20x, and that's probably being conservative.
Husky's alive.
I know.
Yes.
Hey,
Bro, I heard the word beer, and I had to get in it.
Project Shady says, would some
Cheers,
adrenochrome be grade A? Like, is Britney Spears schizo way more fun than like drinking duck?
That's the fun one. That's the fun version.
Saying if you're taking on the characteristics of the person that you just took it from, would it be more fun to be schizo Britney Spears or drunk duck?
I mean, that's the premise from the Terry Southern book, The Blood of the Wig, is saying that adrenochrome from this person might be better or more active than the person, next to them. I think that chemically it is a single chemical, and it would be indistinguishable whether you derived it from a person, a cow, or petrochemicals.
I thought it was you had to scare them to get it out.
It's indistinguishable, but this is where, as an alchemist, we start running into problems because there's another component to it that we're not that we can't weigh chemically. Go
ahead. I was going to say my version of this is the entourage effect that people talk about with like terpenes and weed, that if you take THC isolate, then sure, you might feel a certain way, but you're not getting all these other terpenes, and that those terpenes, some of them weren't even identified until the last like 1 or 2 decades. So there might be all sorts of other chemicals that are also happening in this entourage effect. I won't discount. There might be something analogous to adrenochrome. There might be an entourage effect of adrenochrome, where if you just isolate this one thing from petrochemicals, you might not be getting the full effect. I mean, that's possible.
That's fair. All right, your timer is running out here in like 30 seconds, so I'm going to start looking for a place to raid to. Husky, the chat actually failed all of us, including you, because now you won't be able to party on into gauntlet mode for full crazy, because they have to hit a one big fat red dono since it's Mother's Day, and they didn't hit any of the goal during the debate during the first 3 hours, and so now they are being punished, and it's either pay or I go home. So they failed. See, they would need 2 of what's in your mouth there. Yeah. But I'm gonna go ahead.
They failed that bad. Okay.
They failed really bad. Like, I'm not even giving them the open panel gauntlet crazy mode because they don't deserve it. Especially on Mother's Day. I'm a mother. All of you should be sending Happy Mother's donos. Like,
Happy Mother's Day to you.
See, and they should all be saying that.
Happy Mother's Day.
With all of their money. Ben forgot it was Mother's Day.
You know what? My wife had to go help her parents move.
My mom's been dead for years, so I forget about this holidays.
My wife had to go help her parents move, so she's going to be gone for a week today. So that's all that's been on my head about it. Yeah, so my wife's leaving.
Yeah, you failed. And of course, Sparrow says, love this ad hominem debate. Give him fucking hell, Thomas. How'd you get that one through the super chat filter?
My people have ways.
Like Fourth Wiseman talks about this all the time. He could write the word, from, and it'll be blacked out.
Dude, it's the same for us creators. I literally watch other videos, look at the same thing I'm looking at, and I'll get dinged for it.
Yeah.
That's
crazy.
That's what made me interested in this topic to begin with, is I put together a 20-minute video that just cited all the paperwork, none of the QAnon nonsense, none of the blood magic, just the Scottish Rite and the Rockefellers and the CIA documents. And it kept getting taken down, strikes, bans, even though there was like no conspiracy in it. It was just, here's the paperwork. It was because it had the word adrenochrome in it, and that word would get flagged as hate speech and dangerous speech. And that's really what was like, you know what? I want to lean into this and figure out why everyone's being prevented from even saying the word in any context.
That actually
free speech ain't free in America no more, fellas.
It makes me ponder a lot of things right there. All right. I'm setting up a raid to Caucasian Sasquatch. If you're watching over on YouTube, let's kick off with our final thoughts. Husky, I'm so sorry they failed you, my love. I'm so sorry. I wanted to watch you drink beer out of a shoe, but they obviously didn't think it was important enough. All right, Doc, why don't you kick up with your final thoughts to the panel, sir?
Yeah. So thank you, everyone. Thanks, Paranoid American. Obviously, happy Mother's Day, Sarah. Happy Mother's Day, chat. Anyone with mothers, pick up the phone, call your mother. It is also Goth Mommy Mother's Day and Dom Mommy Mother's Day, but don't tell. I would just, my closing thoughts, my own opinion is what is possible is 10 times worse than anything you could imagine. And then what is possible is also 100 or 1,000 times smaller than what you think is possible. Never underestimate the power of stupidity. Never underestimate what people will do to chase, the president's faces on the almighty American cock. That's it.
The fuck, Doc?
What? Am I not allowed to say that?
No, you're just weird. You're just weird.
What the fuck just
and
happened?
if you're watching over on the Twitch side, I'm sending you to the live from SpaceX Starship Stacked. I don't know, something. Enjoy that raid. Go throw maters if you got them. All right. Okay, Josh, your final thoughts to the panel, sir?
I'm just happy to be with y'all. Y'all have a great night. Happy Mother's Day, Sarah.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you for joining as well. Husky, first and final thoughts to the show?
You all fucking failed me. I wanted to drink beer. I just got home.
Poor Husky.
Fuck you all.
I'll come hang out in your Discord with you.
Cheers, buddy.
While you drink.
I'll drink with you.
Mr. Balderson, to you, please.
As per usual, the people that go on about conspiracy theorists, they're just the ones that don't research or study. They don't go looking at things. And for me, the real tipping point in the debate was when Thomas said this paper says thanks for the funding from the Freemasons, and he said, well, that's not proof. Like, get the fuck out of here. What are you even talking about? And so the proof has to be his flavor of proof. Well, these people don't want proof. They don't want to see that. And I get that. Some people need the rose colored glasses. The world is fucking rough when you start realizing some of the things that the American public and the world in general has been put through by those with power and money. And that's rough stuff to take. But you know what? Putting your head in the sand like a fucking ostrich isn't going to fix it or make it better. And we're all just going to keep suffering so they can get richer and more powerful if we don't do something about it.
That's fair. And
Amen.
Paranoid American, final thoughts from you, sir?
I think that, again, if we go based on the actual debate that we were having, and that's the adrenochrome was Freemason funded, I believe objectively we both agreed on that adrenochrome was related to MK Ultra research. Again, I didn't qualify that with, and they gave credit to Abram Hoffer specifically. So I believe that Freemason funded, objectively proven. MK Ultra also related, objectively proven. And then when we get into the claims of the psychedelics and the mind control, I share in Dr. Abram Hoffer's frustration, where he counts all these papers that are saying that adrenochrome is not psychedelic and yada yada. They're not actually showing, and here's the research we did. All of those papers are basically saying that on paper this doesn't make sense, and therefore we don't believe it. So, I mean, in Craig's absentia, I also want to note that I believe that the burden of proof on requiring specific documents, like on what Ben Balderson said, if I knew that the level of burden of proof would be not only documentation of someone saying this was funded, but also go and find the receipt and exactly what the line item was, I'd be happy to do that if that were the level that we were required. But I think I made a good enough point for anyone interested. And again, a lot of the comments that you'll see if I just post, here's an article about adrenochrome, I'll get lots of feedback that says, adrenochrome's fake. This has been proven as a conspiracy theory. Here, look, you can order online from China right now. And all of that helps people sidestep the more difficult conversation of, yes, it's Freemason funded. Yes, it's MK Ultra related. So I hope I at least introduced enough information for anyone that was a debunker to go and look on their own and be mind blown. Because the first time that I saw the first adrenochrome research was literally funded by the Freemasons, I felt like someone was pranking me, like someone had set up like a conspiracy trap, and I was gonna like restate this, and it was gonna be false. And the more I looked into it, the more it checked out, and that's what made this such an interesting topic to me.
Well, good. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it, and I'm glad I was able to find somebody, especially in the science field, who wanted to,
British.
Even if they were British. But I'm glad we were able to find somebody that was.
You know
willing
what's
to take that
hilarious
on.
about this, Sarah? That song that I sent you right before this, about the Scotsman. That's the Scotsman fighting off England, invading them and kicking
Oh
the
my
British
God.
out of their country.
Could we say that Craig is not a true Scotsman?
Correct. Correct. Oh, I wanted to offer, Ben, are you planning on carrying on after this by chance? Because if so,
do you
it's up
want
to
it, Thomas?
What was that?
Do you want to keep playing?
I'm gonna get out of here and enjoy Mother's Day.
Okay.
Yeah,
well, let's
I'm gonna
go ahead and
hit my
shut down then. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Thursday night, we've got Cringy Leftists coming on with Illegal Immigration is Good for America.
Have a good night, everybody.
Friday night, we've got Shaman Omar and Flying Spaghetti Auditor on Does God Exist? I've got another one coming in, I believe Saturday. It's still pending, but if that comes in, you'll see it. And then we're right back to our normal schedule. All right, get out of here. Fuck off, everyone. I love you. Bye.
Captain's Log, June 2nd, 2836. After 27 years of war between the Degen Coomers and the Sainthood Slayers, a new hope arises. As the battlefield lay weaponized, locked and loaded for destruction, negotiations for a peace treaty are in transition. The moderator has arrived at Station 42. Can this war be ended? Will the Coomers and Slayers find a middle ground?
Abort mission. I repeat, abort mission. Negotiation failure. Abort mission.
Heavy boobies, 6+, low orbit, over grid 15-2.
No joy, Yashin-Man.
Then go to your window and look up their biggest fracking asteroid.
Copy, Yashin-Man. Still blind. Got some kind of system-wide crash in the defense grid.
Put on track yourself right goddamn now, because we got Boku inbound, and they're not carrying flour.
Wait one, Yashin-Man.
We don't have flour.